have an invocation before we start our meeting.
Dear God, thank you for our community and county. Be with our police, sheriffs, firefighters, and other government employees as they seek to improve our quality of life. Be with our military as they seek to preserve our freedom and the freedom of our allies. Be with us today and help us make wise decisions for our city and county. Amen.
Amen. Call to order meeting of Danville Planning and Zoning, February 23rd, 2022. Approval of minutes from January 26, 2022. Is everything correct?
Mr. Chairman, I recommend we approve the minutes.
We have a motion to approve the minutes. Have a second? All in favor? Motion passes. Financial report.
Yeah, the financial report is in your packet. It's the January 2022 report. I'll be glad to answer any questions on that finance report. But note, we're going to, later in the agenda, under new business, we're going to be talking about the preliminary 23 budget as well as an amendment for this fiscal year. So I think it's more applicable that we'll get into more budget discussion when we get to the new business item. But I'm glad to answer any questions on the January report if you have any.
Any questions? You want to?
I make a motion to accept the January report.
We have a motion to approve. We have a second over here. All in favor? Motion passes. Construction sureties.
The report's in your packet just as a courtesy. There's no action needed. They're just there. Same numbers pretty much as last year. 1 cash bond and 3 letters of credit. And we're expecting another letter of credit turned in tomorrow for a project adjacent to the bypass for a new street section. So next month we'll accept that letter of credit once it gets here today or tomorrow.
Okay. All right, subdivision approvals. Do you want to take these one at a time or in groups, or
However you want.
how much discussion are they going to require? We'll just take them one at a time.
Okay.
There's only 6 of them. All right,
Our first plat, we have Rhonda Doss has applied for an approval of a subdivision on a tract of land containing 1.610 acres. It's located at 108 Ghost Pike in Danville. The property is zoned industrial business development. It is actually combining 2 existing tracts into one so that they can extend Dawson Horkey slightly. The plat is ready for final approval.
anybody have any questions? We have a motion for approval. We have a second.
Okay.
All in favor? Motion passes.
Before we go any further, I just want to mention the slides, for some reason, are not separated. They were on the PowerPoint, but then they added 2 to a page, so we'll just have to deal with that as we're going to affect you guys, for the folks in the audience. But each slide is showing up 2 to a page up there for some reason, so we'll just deal with it today. We're on the left-hand exhibit next.
Next, we have Bucks Rivard and Siri LLC. They've applied for the subdivision of a 7.715 acre parcel that fronts on Ben Ali Drive in Danville. This plat creates 3 parcels from the property of Bucks et al., being tract C2, which is 0.420 acres, tract C3, which is 0.328 acres, and tract C4, which is 6.967 acres. Tract C2 and C3 will be added onto tract A, which is currently the property of Party on Air. It's zoned highway business. Corrections have been made. The plat's ready for final approval and signatures, and AGE is a surveyor.
Any comments?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we accept it, approve it.
We've got a motion and a second. All in favor? Motion passes.
Next, we have Shelby Green Limited by Tom Hensley, agent. They've applied for the subdivision of 11.217 acres that's located in the Shelby Green development of Junction City. The plat creates 31 lots to be numbered tracts 29 through, I think I got a typo, 65, is that correct? Or 60? 59, I put a 6 in there. Sorry about that. To create tracts 29 through 59, and then a tract 60, which is the right-of-way for the extension of Clements and Willis Drives into this Phase 2, Section 2 of Shelby Green. The property is zoned R1A. AGE is a surveyor. Plat's ready for final approval.
And I want to add to that, this is what we call a major plat, or what we used to call, so this has new streets, and it's a new section of Shelby Green. It'll have to be bonded, construction contract, admin fee. So this is just the preliminary and final plat approval. The plat's not recorded until all those other instruments are put in place. And just for your information, didn't show up well on the screen there, but the next slide, it's not in your packet up here. This is Shelby Green up there on the slide. And it's hard to see because of the pointer. But this is what they call Phase 1 and 2. The last section you see here is Phase 2, Section 1. That was done when there was no planning and zoning in Junction. And that's the section of the subdivision that currently is not accepted by the city. It's pretty built out at this point. The aerial's a tad bit old. And this new section is now up in this area. The 31 lots that Lisa just mentioned will be up, connect this street to here, so it'll be up in this section. But this section will have to fall under the subdivision rules and regulations now that Junction is back in planning and zoning.
Does that mean that they're gonna have to?
Section 3 is its own kind of process. It was built when there were no standards.
Right.
It's not accepted by the city currently. The city and the developer are discussing some issues. But we're only, as we do subdivisions, we'll just be bonding, inspecting, and developing this section under our rules.
So it's possible then that the city would accept under P and Z the new section?
They have to.
They have to, the
It's
new
required.
section, so that has to be built to certain standards without the section to get to that being accepted.
That's correct.
Will this, for clarification,
We
because I
can't
don't know the
speak.
answer to
We
that
can't
question, but, so will the city then have to go do maintenance on that? Like they can pass the one section to do
Yeah.
maintenance on the other?
Yeah. That's how it's gonna work. We're gonna work with, Henry and I have talked about this. We're gonna talk to the city about Section 3 and the developer. Again, technically it's Phase 2, Phase 1 of Phase 2. So we're gonna talk to the developer and the city and see if maybe there's a compromise in the works. There's several homes now built in that section. Again, it's pretty much built out. And the city actually went and installed street signs and some other issues just to help out, but those are still the developer's streets. They don't meet our standards, but then again, there were no standards in that phase of the development. So we're gonna work with the developer and the city about that, what I'm calling Section 3. But ultimately, there'll be more sections, so there's a good chance then, you know, you'll have city streets all through this, and there just may be a section that stays the responsibility of the developer until that can be worked out. By the way, this is also, this street here, Breathitt, this is not a city street either. So this
Yeah.
was never accepted either.
It's almost untravelable.
That's still the developer's street. So that does occur in phases of development like this where the city accepts portions, other portions are still the developers. We just wanted to point that out, that this is a new section, Shelby Green, that'll now have to fall under the current standards. And the developer understands that. Luther Galloway worked on this design. Everything you see on this plat that's in front of us meets our current rules.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to abstain from voting on this one.
Okay. So noted. We have a motion?
I'll make a motion with,
Got a motion to accept? We've got a second. All in favor? Unanimous? Okay, it passed. Motion passes.
Okay.
Number 4.
Next, we have Raymond Lee Belcher. He's applied for the subdivision of a .509 acre tract of land that is known as 4179 Houstonville Road in Junction City. The plat, originally submitted with an application for a variance, is a retracement plat that adjusts the 50-foot front setback as was established by plat file 1030A to the current highway business zone front setback of 25 foot. It's noted that a barn on the property is non-conforming and that it encroaches over the 0-foot side setback into the neighboring property by about half a foot. Wilmot is the surveyor. The plat's been corrected. It's ready for final approval and signature today.
So how they work that encroachment out?
Well, it's already there, and so it's existing. Interesting enough, it's a 0 setback on the north side because it's commercial next to commercial, but the barn just is there. The gentleman bought the property, inherited that nonconformity. So this plat will actually just note that nonconformity on that northern corner for the barn. Barn may be removed at some point. The developer, Mr. Belcher, we've spoke, he's got a project in mind. He's gonna do some storage units there. That's his goal. It's zoned highway business. And kind of phase 1, he's gonna kind of put buildings on the property, but down the road, phase 2 would be to the western side. And there's a chance the building could go away at some point. But for today, it does encroach into the setback by about half a foot. And it's existing, so the note on the plat, we thought was sufficient enough to document that nonconformity.
But it encroaches on someone else's property as well, right?
Yeah, just short, yeah. So the note's about all we can do. We've had situations like that. We just note them on the plat, whether they be a septic tank, lateral field, or a building corner that encroaches onto another property. It's non-conforming.
You don't
Only
have to
way
get the other property owner to sign off on that, or?
Not sure about the northern property owner.
Sign off on the.
We could have them sign the plat, I guess, just accept that non-conformity. Yeah, it historically has been there. I mean, that would be a good extra catch to put a second signature on there of that other property owner. And then the only other way to really correct it would be to buy a sliver of property from the neighbor and then replat it. But at this point, this gentleman bought the property in its original configuration.
signed with knowledge,
Yeah.
we don't have to force a purchase. I mean,
I'm just asking a question. I don't
Yeah.
know what
We've typically
council
had,
thinks about it. I just thought, you know, I guess the property owner needs to be aware of that.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming it is. I don't know.
we've typically
Just a
handled it
question.
with a non-conforming note, and this is not a replat, it's technically a retracement, but it is a revision, reducing the front setback that was originally platted. So I think a second signature line, it's gonna require some other signatures for utilities. So, yeah, I think that's a way that the neighbor would know. I'm pretty sure the neighbor's aware of it.
Mr. Chairman, that would be a proactive step. The only reason that we haven't required a second signature in nonconformity instances in the past is because there's no change being made to the other affected property. But if the applicant agrees to it, then
I was just asking a
Right.
question for clarification. I'm not, at this
Certainly.
point, requesting anything. I just was curious. So I don't know what
The
general
long-term fix is,
procedure
I believe,
is.
the long-term fix, I believe the barn's gonna go away at some point, because it's gonna be all a highway business
Yeah,
development.
as long as everybody's aware, I guess if that's,
And the metal pins that they're talking about here, I think are in the correct spot, that's what you're saying, but if you cite the line you got a half a foot of the building
Yeah.
positioned. So you do have some way on the document to indicate where it is.
You know, Justin, you wanna add anything?
I mean, the barns, basically it's just a retracement survey, but, the barn's been encroaching for, we actually done a retracement on it, division of it 20-something years ago, encroached in, the same thing.
so it's been duly noted throughout as the deeds have.
Yeah.
Okay.
By the way, I wanna recognize
It's one corner, basically.
Justin here. He turned his plat in, and I called him the next day with some corrections, and he let me know he'd had back surgery, and it was literally just got a surgery. And we were, although he was lucid, and we talked about all these. In fact, he made all the corrections and said he'd be back in a week and he'd be here. So appreciate his helping us out with this. The property owner's kind of in a hurry to get this going too. So everything, all the corrections you see noted on the plat have been made already and brought back with signatures, so it's ready to record actually.
final note on this, there's a body of law that governs nonconformities, and if the barn were to be wiped out in a catastrophe or if it was demolished, then the owner would have to apply for new siding and they wouldn't be able to put it back on the nonconforming spot.
All right, we have a motion? All right, we have a motion. And a second. All in favor? Motion passes.
Do we need to bring Rita back in, or did we? Or- Okay. All right. Next, we have Mark and Janelle Farrell. This was sent in digitally by email. They applied for the subdivision of 15.383 acre tract of land known as 6210 Perryville Road, Boyle County. Tract A is .481 acre and is divided from Farrell's parcel A. Tract A then is consolidated with Tract 2, which belongs to Chris and Heather Stewart, creating a total 1.685 acre Tract 2 for them. The parcels are zoned ag. Joseph Grider is the surveyor. Suggestions were made for corrections on the plat, but I have not heard anything else from the surveyor or the applicants. I've not gotten an application fee so it's had preliminary approval, but I guess it won't get final approval today.
So why are we
because-
even doing
Well,
it?
We put it on there, they submitted it digitally to us, and he said the property owner would show up and pay and sign the application. This does happen occasionally. We go through preliminary approval, we might put them on this agenda and get final, but we obviously are not gonna record the plat or move the plat to the courthouse until everything's corrected and finished. Historically, if they hadn't paid even, we probably would have pulled it off the
Yeah, I
agenda.
don't think we need to address it
We
myself.
can punt it to next month and not approve it, but, we put it on for preliminary, because that happens a lot. The surveyors bring the plats in for tech review, but the applicants haven't got forward to pay or sign. And
That's just my opinion. I don't
That's
know. Let-
fine.
I agree with you. If you haven't got the money set up, that portion of it's important. I think we should just delay it.
That's fine.
Okay.
Lisa can send them an email, but yeah, they
I
hadn't.
had contacted them, yeah.
The
I
out-of-town
didn't get a
surveyor that we
response.
hadn't used or been before, worked with us before, I believe, so we're fine with that. We'll just move it to next month.
Could we have a motion to that effect, Mr. Chairman?
Oh,
All right, we have a motion to, I guess someone needs to make a motion. or I can
I'll make the motion to delay it for the next time interval.
So they make, yeah, it's ready to be heard. All right, we have a motion, a second. Yes, all in favor? Motion passes.
thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Paul and Patricia Murray. They've applied for the subdivision of their property located on the south side of Persimmon Knob Road in Boyle County. The division of the Murray's existing lands will create the final tract 9A2 at 4.067 acres, tract 9A1 at 2.035 acres, and parcel 2 at 0.718 acres. Parcel 2 has 41.53 or 51 foot of road frontage on Persimmon Knob and is made a part of tract 9B, making that tract a total of 6.643 acres. The property is zoned ag. Carroll is the surveyor, and I'm gonna let him explain to you, if he would, exactly what they're doing here, because it's a little confusing how it's.
Well, I can do it too, real quick. Steve could get up here too, so. This property right here, historically, this was a tract. This was a 2-acre tract approximately, and there was a 40-foot strip that served this piece. They're taking this strip and adding it to the house lot, and they're taking a 50-foot strip and adding it over here. So they're just basically swapping their frontage from the western end to the eastern end, which by the way was 40 foot, which wasn't legal frontage really anyhow, and making it 50 foot wide and adding it to the farm back here. So when it's all said and done, this will be one tract. This 2-acre tract got a little smaller, or I guess it was 2 and some change. And then this strip now gets added to the back piece. It's just a swap between, and the same property owner owns all the parcels. Does that sound about right, Steve? Yeah. They're all zoned agriculture.
Do we have any discussion? We got a motion for approval, and we have a second. All in favor? Motion passes. All right, we'll go into our public hearing phase. Paul Foster has filed a site development plan on tract of land containing I'm sorry.
They were talking.
On a tract of land containing 4.387 acres located at 101 Kim Avenue, Danville, Kentucky. The property is zoned highway business.
All right, this is a site plan application and not too complicated. Again, I apologize about the slides, but this is an aerial. It wasn't in your packet. So this is Walmart, and this is the storage units that are already built back behind Walmart. And what's being proposed is to add more storage units in this location, right here along Kim Avenue. So again, that's Walmart, and so what you see on this slide, these 4 buildings would be in this general location. These are other storage units up here. So this is a site development plan, and it meets all our requirements. We just had a handful of notes. Again, it's zoned highway business. They're proposing 25,500 square foot of additional storage units. on this tract, which is 4.387 acres. That makes the overall lot coverage that you see on the right-hand side would be about 55% coverage on the property. And highway business actually allows you to cover up to 90% of the lot if the developer chose. The issue we have with this, and we need actually some conditions added to the site plan. At this point, we did not get a landscape plan. We've been talking with the applicant and AGE about what we have to do to meet the landscape requirements for these storage units. We did not get a landscape plan. The drainage is fairly well identified on the exhibit. It shows the inlets here, and in green, it shows the piping. It eventually takes us down to the basin behind Walmart, but the city wants a complete drainage plan to verify the capacity of the drainage basin on the south side of Walmart. So that's the second condition. Again, we're okay with the site plan moving forward with the following conditions: that a landscape plan and a drainage plan be submitted prior to the issuance of a zoning permit. And then the last issue we have is there's a platted utility easement on the eastern side of the property that, according to the developer and the engineering firm, does not contain utilities, and their desire is to abandon that easement. So to build that fourth building, or the most eastern building, that utility easement's gonna have to be addressed by way of a plat revision. And then they'll have to work with the city of Danville to abandon that utility easement. And I believe they're working on that process with the city. So that's kind of the third condition, that we'll need a revised plat to deal with that utility easement, or we'll call building number 4, cannot be constructed until that's done. So again, the next step after a zoning or a site plan is a zoning permit, and at this point, that would be held until we get a landscape plan, of a revised drainage plan, and then the utility easement is addressed, and then we could move forward with the zoning permit. But we're okay with not holding up the site plan based on those issues, just make them conditions.
Yes, sir. Identify yourself, please.
Dale Shepperson with AGE Engineering. And we are working with, like Steve said, with City of Danville and Kentucky Utilities, any utilities for the removal of the 20-foot utility easement. And we just got an email back from KU yesterday afternoon, so we couldn't get that on here, but we got a meeting with KU to make sure that they are fine with it. There is no utilities along that portion of that easement. And City of Danville also, we talked with them also. And in order to get that done, what we'll have to do is, if this plan carries through, then so next month, bring a plat in that actually abolishes that easement to tie to this. So we can't do that with this plat, but we will have to do that in a separate plat to abolish that easement. As far as the detention, that was all when Walmart came to Danville, that this whole area was, the detention plan was for the whole area. The only problem with that is we're trying to get with the city to get that retention plan, and so far they have not been able to provide that to us. But this whole area is based on the same retention plan that Walmart has. It is one plan. And then the third issue was the landscape, and what Mr. Vice Director, he's here. What he wants to do instead of a fence with slats was, I think, the trees on 8-foot centers. It's what we had talked about. So that, I think that's what he is wanting to do as far as the landscape plan. So there won't be a fence with slats or anything like that. It'll just be trees on 8-foot centers. And that'll happen around the north side of the property and the west side of the buildings there. There's already a berm and spruce trees, pine trees on the eastern side of the property. So the landscape plan will just be on the north side and the west side. I just wanted to put that 2 cents in for you, so you know a little bit more about it.
Okay, thank you.
You know, we're gonna hold the zoning permit until we get the revised landscape plan, some confirmation from the city on the drainage, and then the replat would come to you next month. So you would be able to acknowledge that the utility easement's been revised formally. And KU and the city would have to sign off on that plat, because they're the two utilities may potentially
So
could.
if this were to be approved, it'd just be with those three
Correct.
conditions. Okay. Do I hear a motion? Commissioner Boyd made a motion to approve. We got a second. All in favor? Everybody? It's unanimous. Thank you. Appreciate it. All right, we have an item that was tabled from the previous meeting. Need a motion to bring it back.
I'll make a motion that we take item 5 off the tape as a table item and return it to the agenda for today's discussion.
Okay, have a motion? And second. All in favor? All right. So moved.
All right, well, I guess I'll take off with this a little bit. This is in reverse order from last month. We had 2 tabled items. We had a zoning ordinance amendment in Article 5, which basically deals with merchant electric generating facilities, or what folks call solar farms. And we had an amendment last month that we discussed in pretty good detail. I have all the slides on this PowerPoint, which were, if you remember, 100 and some slides from those other exhibits. I also had, there was an exhibit introduced from a Mr. Dearborn. Those slides are also on here if we need to reference any. But basically, I'm just going to focus on the handful of pages in the text amendment, tell you what's happened since the last month. I think the goal was to just table it last month, bring it back this month, and again, open it up for public comment so you guys could hear all the comments. There was a letter that you guys got from Mr. Gurman. He wasn't able to be here, and he called me yesterday, and he watched the meeting last month. He's been following this process pretty close, and he had some comments that he wanted to enter into the record, and those are at your seat. I've also had several calls from other property owners. Ms. Spoonamore that spoke at the last meeting, we spoke a couple times. I spoke with her brother. Just different people have called just to, make comments. Spoke with the magistrate a little bit and some of the fiscal court members. So really just getting clarity on some issues. Spoke with Tom Cotton. It was spoke here, you guys remember last month, with Wilderness Solar. He's ill right now, but we probably talked 3 or 4 times for several hours maybe, because there's pending litigation or legislation at the state on this issue in 2 different bills, a Senate Bill 69 and a House Bill 392. Those 2 bills are doing some different things, and 392 started in the House and rolled through the House really quick, got all 3 votes, was put into the Senate, and then sent to Natural Resources Committee, which already had the Senate Bill 69 that Senator Hornback proposed. It made some other changes to the state law. So both bills are now in the same committee in the Senate. And interesting enough, Senate Bill 69 took some action earlier this month and made some changes. And those 2 bills are happening in the legislature, which was another reason we tabled this, to see what the legislature may do in this area. And it appears nothing that the legislature is doing at this point really affects our amendment. It just adds verbiage to the state law that already exists, very detailed language, mostly in the area of decommissioning and that process of reverting the land back to its natural state. The state, those 2 bills are addressing those issues, which would make those state requirements already tagged on to KRS 278.
You're, make sure I clarify it, Steve, for a minute. The legislative bills are still being evaluated.
Still being evaluated, and I have that Senate Bill 69, which appears to be the bill that's moving a little quicker, getting more consideration. Mr. Cotton confirmed that the state solar group that's out there, a lobbying group, is latched on to this legislation and is tracking that too. And at this point, Senate Bill 69, according to them, they feel is the bill that has a better chance to finish out the legislative process. Regardless, for us, there's obviously going to be some state law changes possibly, and what the state law says right now, and Henry can jump in here, but KRS 278 lays out a whole laundry list of requirements to do a solar farm. It's way beyond anything we're proposing. But it does allow the local governments, if you have planning and zoning, to adopt your own additional rules, especially in areas of setbacks, in lieu of the state requirements. The decommissioning language is now being proposed to be put in the state law, and it's very complicated on how the plans would be submitted, how the bonds would be assessed, how the bonds are adjusted for inflation over, let's say, a 50-year period or however long these bonds have to sit, and then how the reclamation process would work 20 or 30 or 50 years into the future, and then the state would be involved in that. I guess most thing I could compare it to would be like a coal reclamation project that we've seen around the state of Kentucky. So there'd be a process in the state law that the companies have to adhere to through the Cabinet of Natural Resources. So.
Do I understand right then that with respect to reclamation, going back to previous state, that the state's covering that in great detail? But when it comes to the other issues here, they're leaving it to the counties that have P and Z so that we can do the.
They're not leaving it to us. They already have rules. But if we have P and Z, they're allowing us to do additional rules.
Okay.
And they also, Senate Bill 69, the difference between 392 and 69 is 392 puts decommissioning into process all as a state process. 69 puts a little wiggle room in it and says that locals can also do a decommissioning process if they choose. And I think the reason they're putting that in the bill is because there's already governments, locals, that have already passed that process. We've already got counties in the state that have already adopted rules with decommissioning because that model ordinance went around that I showed you all last month. Several counties just latched onto it and passed the whole thing, which had a decommission element in it. Our proposal does not go down that road, and part of the reason I feel that way is the state regulations are going to address that. Just for your, I'll get to that. This is the Senate Bill 69. Everything that's underlined in black is what's new. This is a very complicated law that the solar companies have to deal with. I won't go, it's 20-some pages long. Everything in black, again, is being added. And the decommissioning language starts right there at the bottom of, I think that says page 12.
Yep.
And it goes through this process, and then it picks back up here, all the bonding that has to happen and how the cabinet's going to handle that, all that's there. So, and this is the rest of the law. There's a ton of stuff in the state law that these companies already have to adhere to in siting a facility and getting approval from the state. So what we're doing at the local level through our amendment is just basically adjusting those setbacks, requiring some other plans, some other kind of, fire improvement plan, for example. And then obviously making a distinction on what stays in the ag district and can happen by right with rules, and then what standard of these facilities then have to be an industrial use by right. And I'll leave it with that because going back to our chart, just pointing out, it's interesting, our chart has always had this facility in it. We've had this in our ordinance now since the amendment we made in 2020. And the Ps that you already see in the ag and the industrial zones have already been there. We're not proposing any changes. Interesting enough, we've already, somewhat by default, have said these facilities might be an agricultural style facility or an industrial style facility. We just didn't define the splits on what triggers when you can do it in the ag and when you can do it in industrial. And that's what's being done with this paragraph right here. That we say in an unincorporated area of Boyle County, if a facility is proposed to be greater than 50 megawatts in project size, then they're an industrial use. And if they're less than 50, they're an agricultural use.
Now, Steve, is there a chance that the legislature is going to claim that same, you have no idea at this point? Is
I've
really
got
what
the
it
bill
says.
right here. They're staying with their same standard. They're adding the 10-acre minimum to start a facility, and they still use the 10 megawatts as the threshold to define what a merchant electric generating facility is. So they use 10 megawatts. It's tied into KRS 132, which is the stuff about industrial bonds, and
Right.
there's some verbiage that's been added onto this Senate bill that basically describes that these can't be, when they're developed, still claim agriculture exemptions, and they can't be considered industrial buildings for industrial revenue bonds. So there's some verbiage that's being amended. There's two amendments to this bill. that deal with KRS 132.
Mr. Collier, what the
ahead.
bills don't do is they don't get into the zoning statutes, Chapter 100, and so they wouldn't wade into when a zone change is or is not needed. They'll leave that to local authorities.
Okay, that's what I wanted to make sure, clarification, that becomes a feature or an element of that we can elect to do or we can not elect to do.
So the whole,
Okay.
our whole ordinance is right there, funny enough, on these two slides. This kind of A through L process where we basically lay out what we do in the ag threshold, what we do in the industrial threshold. All facilities need a site plan that has to come through this body in D. We have setbacks outlined in E and F. Outdoor storage issues in G. Landscape issues kick in H. And dealing with streets and construction entrances and the next few, and then again, a fire protection plan or something suitable in lieu of that the locals would look at in L.
Steve, I don't know what 50 megawatts versus 10 megawatts looks like.
I don't either.
You know,
So,
I mean, why would, if we, what we.
It's a matter of land mass.
Is it land mass, okay.
yeah. Well, they can be designed. Mr. Cotton was here last month. I think it weighed into that somewhat. Right now, again, if you want to lay eyes on a facility, the one up on 64 close to Winchester is 66 acres in size approximately. And a megawatt is generally defined as between 4 and 7 acres, but it depends on terrain and technology, and the solar companies would only, I mean, they'd be the ones to come and explain to you the difference, what a megawatt could look like. But in general, it's going to consume 4 to 7 acres per megawatt. We use 50 megawatts as the split because, again, 10 megawatts generates what a facility is. And what we're trying to do is make a decision on when they stay ag and at what scale do they get so big they feel industrial. We use 50 megawatts because that was 5 times the size. We made our landscape buffer 5 times the requirement normally. Thinking about that, then a farm that's 200-300 acres could do a facility, stay ag. They still got to follow all the rules. But a project that obviously has been speculated about, 1,000 acres, 3,000 acres, is going to be more of an industrial scale in our opinion, and would need to follow the industrial rezoning process.
So does our ordinance take into account linking together those?
Yes.
So if you had, so this says 10 acres, okay? So if they came in here and,
It says it right here. It's real, it's hard to read, but right here it says, and I'm going to read it. So, well, there's 2 things. First off, if a facility is being proposed in the state, this is just reading the state law, they're going to have to make an application with the state first. And they have to define a project area, define a megawatt threshold. And so they make a state application, let's say, in this case, 3,000 acres. And then X number of acres would be in Boyle County, Garrett County, Lincoln County. That's what the speculation is, I guess. What we're saying is if you're on a tract of land, tracts of land, or contiguous tracts of lands with a project area capable of operating an aggregate capacity greater than 50 megawatts. So for us, it doesn't matter whether it's on one piece or 30 pieces. If that is one facility moving towards one aggregate project under the state definition, then that's how we're defining the project.
And Steve,
there are-
one other aspect to make sure, if I understand what you're saying, it doesn't matter whether it's in Boyle County. You could take 10 acres in Boyle County, if it's connected to the rest of the acreage,
And it's
it's
part of
large.
a 300 megawatt facility, that's how we're going to define it. And that's what it says right here in that sentence, and it's used again, it's right here under the exception language, and when we say it's an industrial use, it's also mentioned right here. When we make the splits between ag and industrial, we say the same, over here, I'm sorry. The same verbiage is laid out in here. So we're using the aggregate, capable of producing the aggregate power of a megawatt threshold, and we're saying on tracts of land or continuous tracts of land. The interesting thing is what we've learned about, these are all heading towards a specific substation or a location. They're creating a power grid that's moving to a point. And again, that has to be defined by the state as a project. So it's unlikely the company's going to come in and do a project with the state, a siting process that you saw through all that process, and do just 50 acres, then do another one that's 40 acres. They're looking at a cumulative project that they have to register with the state. And last month, that you all saw, we had a project that, there's one being built in Lancaster right now, south side of Lancaster, on 485 acres. And that's the only project that's currently, well, there's a couple projects under construction, but that's the newest project. And that's 485 acres that's been defined under their state siting application. It's actually part in the city, part in the county there. And it's under construction. And it has a defined megawatt project area that you can look on the state website. In fact, we have, I won't get to that slide, but we actually have a slide of that defines the project size.
I'm thinking about in terms of like services, and let's say fire, as you start to expand out this thing as a network, let's say links and nodes, right? So you have a big substation and smaller substations that feed into it, and then at some point, I'm thinking about, like, if I was gonna do this, if I wanted to build one of these things, I would start small and then keep adding small to get underneath.
You can't do that under state rules.
To get underneath the county rules here, okay? So whatever the size limit is that we decide.
I don't think that,
defined by acres and whatever the megawatts are that we define.
I don't think they can do that under that state rule, but they might be able to, but when you read this and
Well, but
get.
what about our county zoning? What I don't wanna have happen is that you can just keep adding nodes to something with underneath a certain
But we're
level.
not, that's not how we'd evaluate. If someone came in and said, we're gonna build 80 acres, and say, we're an ag and we're under 50, first thing we're gonna do is verify through the PJM website, I'll have to find what it's gonna look like. We're gonna go verify that they've registered, because we say they have to comply with all the state rules, all the siting rules. So the first thing we're gonna do is go find this right here. Let's get to this slide. We're gonna go, well, I must have missed it. Right there. We're gonna go to the state website and verify the project's been filed with the state, how they defined their megawatt, their capacity. And if it's defined as a project, then that's what we're gonna use.
I guess what I'm getting at is, what if they define something underneath? Let's say that we get somebody, let's say that somebody wants to, I don't know how these things work, this is why I'm asking the question. If somebody wants to put 10 acres of solar panels, somewhere in the county, and then connect it to another one, that it's 10 acres, right? And you say, well, 10 acres doesn't fall underneath our ordinance, but then it's connected to the larger grid, then
Yeah,
how is that not part of a larger project?
I have a suggested revision for subsection C. This is effectively striking the first three lines, but it kind of states directly what our subsection 5C implies, and it would read as follows. Merchant electric generating facility infrastructure on one lot or on multiple contiguous lots shall be considered a single facility for purposes of this ordinance.
So you would suggest that being, instead of what 5C says now?
That would be the first three lines of 5C.
Would you repeat that again, Henry, sir?
I will. It reads, merchant electric generating facility infrastructure on one lot or on multiple contiguous lots shall be considered a single facility for purposes of this ordinance. And then it would continue on the middle of line 3 of C, and it would say, facilities capable of operating at an aggregate capacity greater than 50 megawatts shall only be located. et
Was
cetera,
there a
et cetera.
significance of you changing from the word land to lot, or is that just?
Yes, that's another kind of housekeeping matter. Our zoning ordinance defines lot. It does not define tract or parcel. I was going to suggest that tract or parcel, where used in this ordinance, be switched to lot, just so there's consistency and no one can raise a question saying, oh, that's a parcel, that's not a lot. Just have it all be lot throughout.
So what's
What does
interesting,
that do for my question of connecting to a larger project?
If you, the way that I would hope that the zoning director would interpret it is, if you brought in something that proved to be a connection, then you would have to then get a zone change for the larger massive. Even if you had snuck something in previously as under the 10-acre threshold, connecting to it then generates something above the 10-acre threshold and zone
I guess
change.
that's what I'm saying, how, can we put that in here so that it's not, I guess what, this would make me feel really better if we took into account anything that connects into the larger one. Okay, so, like, it doesn't prevent me from putting 10 acres of solar on a property.
Well, you would, that would never apply to you. This is where I guess this is
It's-
apples and oranges.
What if they gave me money to put 10 acres on my
You-
solar to
you-
connect to their project?
There's no such project like that, and I'll explain why. This is what's in Lancaster right now being built. That's 485 acres. You gotta start with a substation. So a KU substation probably has to be in pretty close proximity to your property. That's, the companies that I've talked to, they're not building facilities on private properties and metering back into the grid through regular, these are direct facilities that are attached directly to a fairly large substation. That's 485 acres that's being built in Lancaster. And then they're all over 10 megawatts. They're greatly over that. And now, because the economy of scale, what the company's telling me is nobody's building 10 megawatt or 30 megawatt or 50. They're 100 or 200 or 300 megawatt facilities. They're massive facilities. They're 1,000-acre facilities. This is one of the smaller ones that you would see from what we've researched and talked, and this is 485 acres. The likelihood that you're gonna see a 80-acre facility or a 10-acre facility or a 20-acre facility, at some threshold, you're not even gonna meet the definition of a,
I guess what I'm saying is, what if you connect a whole bunch of 80-acre facilities?
I know pretty much where
So
It is-
Henry's suggestion about it
I mean,
being contiguous doesn't, address your.
well, I guess the issue is if you're building a facility that meets the definition right now, you have to go through the process. You just stay ag, you're still following all the rules. If the facility gets big enough, now you need to be industrial, you're still following all the rules. But the challenge is you have to meet the definition from the start to be a merchant electric generating facility under the state law. So you have to be at least 10 acres and 10 megawatts, which more than likely is gonna be about 70 or 80 acres. And there's no projects like that in the pipeline or is being discussed anywhere in the state. They're all way bigger than that.
What happens when they run out of large land, Steve?
That's my point, is the industrial part versus the ag part. Am I making any sense what I'm talking about to you?
Well, I guess we're catching it either way. I don't understand why we,
If you're a certain size landowner, and I'm avoiding acres, let's say if you're a certain size small landowner, and you're connecting to a larger project, you're still connecting to a project that is zoned industrial, but now you're on ag, so they can just keep going out into ag. I guess what I'm getting at is why do we have ag versus industrial if at some point you can go back to even the smaller, properties and keep them ag? If
I don't-
they have to go through a zone change, is what I'm saying. If they have to go through a zone change for a certain size, then it would be in their interest to just go to lots of smaller farmers
but that's not what they're doing. I mean, right now, the projects we're talking about,
I
they're dealing
mean,
with.
I think, but the project has to, it has to have, there's an umbrella that they have to apply, that whatever their project is, whether it's here, they still have to have an umbrella for their application. So that umbrella
Yeah.
would be contiguous lands. And then I would think that we are covering that because it's contiguous lands, because they're connected, if not connected by boundaries, they're connected by their circuits or whatever.
My question is, if they do that whole thing in contiguous land, and then
Well, what's the definition of contiguous? Is it contiguous because it's touching? Because even this 3,000 acres isn't all touching.
No, we say
'Cause it's on one side of the lake and the other.
that's my point. If
It's
they
con-
wanted to add in the future.
It's contiguous because it's all interconnected.
That's my point. That's exactly the point.
I think that's what they're saying.
If they wanted to expand the project next time, the next expansion of land that expands to that, that's outside of the industrial zone, that they, let's say that they do that and do a request, okay? The next farm that's outside of that they add to that project, will that
Now, Tom, as a
Depends
point,
what- under
the
their
mer-
state-
the definition according to the Kentucky state, not our local, the merchant generating facility is the point that you're going to sell it into the grid work at wholesale market price, whatever it is. It doesn't define where that comes from. Doesn't state that. Yeah, and my opinion is if you're going to take and add another 10 acres and it's going to go through that hub,
Right,
it's now merchant.
which has to go to industrial, that's all I'm asking.
That's,
Does that make sense to you?
that's
I
how
think
this is,
that, I think that's
Yeah.
already,
it's addressed.
it's already addressed.
Yeah, so that definition's there.
That was my question,
Yeah.
is does this address that so that the next piece of land that hooks into that has to then also be zoned industrial?
Well, I think you're making it a little more simple than it can be, because they can't just go out and add another piece of land. They'd have to
Start over.
resubmit to the state what
And-
their,
And the federal maybe.
Is that the case? Like if they just want to add
Oh,
some
yeah,
more?
yeah. It's,
They have
that's,
to go back to the state? and
yeah,
resubmit?
they have to, under the state law, they have to define a project. There's gonna be, they have to go through a citing process that's very cumbersome in this state law right here, 25 pages. All this verbiage, there's federal statutes referenced in here. There's gonna be tax issues, maybe state incentives.
Is this the one that's gonna be passed?
This is what's being talked about. What's already in the lighter color is already the state law.
Okay.
It's already what they have to do today. And so they have to define a project, go through a state process, define a project, have a contract with KU, go through all this kind of detailed environmental stuff. There's a whole bunch of verbiage in here. And again, talking to the company, the idea, Tom, what you're saying, that they would do this piecemeal is just not how these facilities are done. They come in and have to do one siting application. Now, how this thing transfers in the future and lots of other issues, the likelihood that they'd have to go all back through this process to add another 30 acres. They might do that, and there may be an amendment process, but what they're doing right now is securing land leases for a project area to submit to the state.
I totally understand that. I'm thinking about future down the line, if they go
Other
smaller.
strategy,
That's what,
different strategy.
that's exactly what I'm talking about, is the different strategy. If, I'm not saying anything about the company and their intent today. Okay? As a consultant, I've asked multiple CEOs, if your kids take over and they take the company into a 90-degree different direction, are you gonna be okay with that? Okay? And so what I'm asking now is for ourselves, are we okay with that if they adopt a different split? If they go through the butt pain of doing all of this and going through to make this an industrial, zone industrial, and we vote on that and approve that, and then they go, great, got that done, from now on, what we're gonna do is add smaller ones to it that don't fall into the industrial.
I'm not really that worried.
I wanna make sure that.
well, we've already said you can have.
Smaller facilities anyhow.
We were already saying 50 megawatts, that's 350 acres.
We'd be okay with staying ag anyhow.
We're saying that's okay.
Well, this, the article that I texted you about, Article 4.5, it says that you can't have a ground solar panel system on tracts that are 10 acres in
Right.
size. Would that address that?
Well, the way reason that's in there is right now, what we're trying to define in Article 4 is when this becomes a primary use. So if you have a farm and you want to put, let's say you want to put, you already have a farm and you want to say do 80 acres on your farm for you, there's no prohibition against that. But if it's the primary use of a property, that means it's all we're going to do. This property now is a solar farm. It has to be at least 10 acres and it's industrial at a certain threshold. That's right. It
I
stays
think-
ag at a certain threshold, and at a higher threshold, it
I
needs
think
to be
calling them
industrial.
farms a misnomer too. We need to call them merchant.
Well, but that's
electric
the
generating
difference, though.
facility.
I could put 100 acres on my farm,
Right.
and if it's not defined, if I'm not selling power back into the grid at wholesale rates,
If you're
That's
consuming,
just part
if
of
you're
my
consuming
farm.
the whole thing, yeah,
that's a different
That's
facility.
not my issue.
Yeah, that's right.
My issue is, do you connect into the larger, I'm uncomfortable with this unless, for the future, if it's our zoning ordinance and we have planning and zoning, I'd like it to say that in the future, if it connects into this industrial, then you have to have a zone industrial.
Yeah, but see, that's where I guess it's interesting. If I'm doing something private for myself, I could have 100 acres worth. And I have no setbacks, no rules, because it's ag, it's part of my farm, it's exempt. But if I'm defining it as part of a project, then we're saying it needs to be industrial use. Well, it really may be the same feel and look. It's 60 acres of panels. And we're trying to say, well, that's industrial. Well, it depends. It's industrial if it's part of a large power grid connected through a substation. But the physical built environment may look exactly the same. And in one situation, there's no rules. The other situation, you're going to follow rules. What we try to say is in the ag zone, we're okay with a smaller facility, like the chairman mentioned, let's say 350, 400 acres, stay in ag, but following all the rules. But when you get above that 50 megawatts, you're getting so
And-
big in size,
And
let's say.
that 50 megawatts is an arbitrary number that we've come up with.
That's
and
exactly
that can
right.
be- I mean, that could be adjusted.
Totally agree, but what I'm saying is we have all these setbacks and all the rules, and if they say, yep, we're gonna do that, and then hypothetically, they lease all of the next 1,000 acres that are adjacent, I don't know how far that goes, I'm making that number up.
Well,
So if they lease the next 1,000 acres, even in really small pieces, okay, and to connect to that, those then would be ag, and they wouldn't have to
but
follow any.
we're
rules.
defining it by the megawatt project area.
So,
So-
Raymond, you've been writing very carefully over there. Do you have a suggestion that helps to address his concern?
Ms. Davenport, this is a philosophical discussion. If the commission decides that they want to provide something that addresses this concern, I have proposed text, I think. I'll read it. It says, "Development of an adjacent property to a previously developed facility and connection of the two properties shall cause all the contiguous facilities to be considered one facility and shall trigger the necessity of industrial zoning for all the contiguous lands, should they meet the threshold set out in this section."
See, I'll say I don't agree, and I'll tell you why. If we're gonna go down that road, then just fix it where everything over 10 requires industrial zoning. Just do that. It'd be simpler. Just anything that meets the definition under state law is an industrial project. Because we're trying to make a split to say that some small projects could stay ag. Now, all the counties around us are letting them stay ag
Yeah.
with rules.
Okay, but we're not the other.
I understand, but I'm saying, but we were trying to make a two-tiered split. Maybe a simpler way is to just take it one direction or the other. Because we're gonna be, again, trying to figure this out on the fly. If that's what we wanna do, is we're worried that even a small, another 10 acres comes in, or let's say another 10 megawatts, well, then just make them all industrial.
I'm just, you guys understand what I'm getting at. I don't want them to be able to, if we're gonna make them go industrial now, we're gonna connect.
Well, wait a
those
minute,
that-
we're not making them go industrial, we're giving people an opportunity to have a solar farm on their land up to 50 megawatts. You can't throw them all in the same basket. So either you take away that right, you say you can't have 50 megawatts on your own land, you can have 40, you can have 30, you can have 10, you can have one, or you can have none. But you can't throw them all in the same basket. That's why I think that's what the director's saying. We're trying to provide private property owners the opportunity to add another business to their farming business if they want to do so.
And we're trying to define what we feel is industrial at what scale. And that's what's hard here is, you know, if you look at a 60-acre facility, it feels industrial, just 60 acres, but it's how it's designed. The one in Lancaster is 485 acres. It's an industrial site when you go over there. I mean, they're moving every inch of dirt. It's excavation project now, the way it's stated. It's a massive project. It's gonna have chain link fence and barbed wire around it. It feels industrial at 400 acres. So I guess it's gonna come down to the design every time. That's why requiring the site plan, I think, is the best thing we have in this amendment, is a site plan has to come in on all facilities. Some of them may be more spread out, have more green space. We just don't know until we get a project. What we're trying to say is at some threshold, someone could stay ag, not have to go through the rezoning process.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate
Well, and I think that's addressed in their, when they get their permit or license or whatever to do that, they have to state where all this energy is coming from.
You know, and maybe
Yeah.
that's the fix, is up there in A,
Yeah.
where we say they have to meet all the state and federal laws. That before they can even make application here or designate, help us designate what they are, that we have to get some verification. We say some verbiage here that we have to get some information sent back to us on the fire protection, but here we just say they have to meet the state law. But maybe we have to get their application and understand their project area and get a clear definition from the state on what the project is. Now, again, I've talked to the company that's looking in Boyle County, and they tell me it's about a 3,000 to 3,600 acre facility in 3 counties. And they're working with landowners to secure leases, but they tell me the first step is to file an application with the state of Kentucky and define their project. So that's what I assume would be first, and then we would know whether it was 50 megawatts or 100 or 300. But down the road, if they want to amend that project and add another 30 acres into that and go from 300 megawatts to 310, I see what you're saying. At that point, we've already defined it as an industrial facility.
That's all I'm asking, is that they add to it, that whatever they add to it.
They'd have
goes
to-
the same.
They'd have to reapply, wouldn't they?
So my
Don?
guess is at the state, it would go, it's not a 10 megawatt facility they're bringing online. They're going from 300 to 310.
And they do have,
And they'd have to apply. with
the
state.
general definitions on merchant from the Kentucky's perspective, the state perspective, says, yeah, they have to reapply.
I don't think you can go out in the state and build it.
Why can't we do that locally here? Why
Well-
can't we define that locally here according to the words that Henry just read?
Well, we're trying to piggyback on the state law, and
Well,
that's,
We don't make laws here.
No,
We actually, the county does, that's what our zoning ordinance.
Well, that's up to the county. That's not us.
well, and
But we define, we can make them say what's industrial and what's,
No, we can't.
isn't that what we're doing here?
We're-
Isn't that what we're doing here, we're making them go to industrial?
No, we're not making anybody do anything.
we're just defining over 50 megawatts, you're an industrial use, under 50 megawatts.
Recommendations to go forward. for
Yes.
approval or denial.
We are making a split at 50 megawatts as a project area. When you stay ag, follow every rule, and when you have to, you'd have to go through a zone change process.
I think I had a conversation with Steve yesterday. I had to break this down to me, and I think the way we need to look at it, or okay, how many acres of land are we talking about per megawatt? That's 4 to 7 acres, or for now. It could change. They could be able to do more megawatts on less land. So at 50, we're looking at 300 to 350 acres. I guess my point is, and I asked it, at what point does this surpass an agricultural use? At what point does it become an industrial site? And, as Steve said, when you start putting up fencing and razor wire and I mean, that changes to me from.
Batteries and
Oh,
power and.
Well, you're gonna have batteries no matter what, whether it's a 10 mil, so, but I mean, at what point does this become an industrial site? I think that's that's a question we have to ask ourselves and we have to determine. And then move forward from there. I think, strongly feel that people should have, the right to generate electricity on their property, on their farms. At what point, does that become an industrial operation? We've said you can have up to 50 megawatts, but you're gonna use 50% of the land. So if that's the case, then that's 350 acres, but then you've got to have 700 acres to do that. Because you've got to leave the other 50% in ag. So is that suitable? Those are things, that's how I have to look at it, to see what exactly, that picture up there at 485 acres, if you look at that, I haven't seen it personally, but
Hold the image.
I'll get there.
there's 495 acres that's completely covered.
Mhm.
They have, of course, they have no setbacks, no screening or anything. I don't think they have any requirements, correct?
Let me get to it, right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right on
That's not
39.
crops. That's not corn.
Yeah, that's 485 acres.
Basically,
That's 27, that's right across from the school and Las Agaves restaurant that I eat at all times, like right there on 27. That's 39 right there in Lancaster. You go out there and they're doing the dirt work probably today. It's a
And
massive,
Steve, I mean,
that's 485 acres, and what we're hearing about in this project, again, it's all rumor, is a 3,000.
8 times
plus
that
acre.
size.
So at what scale and what design does it feel industrial? I think that's what we're trying to make the splits. There may
guess
be a
it-
design that's 300 acres that still feels agriculture and still is an agriculture
Well,
production.
what in our ordinance as it states right now, we're pretty much approving this much.
And we say you have to at least keep 50% of the property in agricultural use under the state law if you do the ag version. So anyone that wants to use all their property is gonna have to go the industrial route, even below 50 megawatts, if they wanna use the entire parcel. Because we're saying 50% has to always stay in agricultural use. That's a pretty hefty, that's one of the things in the letter you got, and some of the other farmers that contacted me, they would hope that the 50% rule maybe would be reconsidered. So if they decide to do solar, that they could utilize their whole property.
And then I guess another conundrum that I have is, KRS 100, the definition of ag, that's, again, definitions mean something, but they do and they don't. The definition of ag use has not, does not state anything about solar farms. But it also doesn't state anything about rick houses. So that's a conundrum. That pretty much, to me, it's cut and dried. Okay, it doesn't state in the definition of ag use, but then we've got rick houses all over the state of Kentucky that are in ag use, and it's not stated in there either. So, I mean, it made it pretty easy cut and dry, then it gets all muddy again.
Are you suggesting a rick house and this thing relative to coverage of land, it should be the same?
No, the use of the land, I think, is what's at point there.
It's
Like,
use.
we created that exception here
That's
for
right.
the rick houses here in Boyle County to go in industrial land. We're not saying they're industrial use, but they're clearly in industrial use. They're industrial warehousing. But we're saying we're allowing that use in the ag zone.
Well, they're
But you have to
creating
keep
industrial.
50% of the land still in agricultural use. So the idea is that piece of property still is in ag production. You can't just go all the way to the industrial use by right and be in an ag zone. We're still meeting the definition of what we feel is the ag definition under the state law. We're allowing other uses in there, in that situation by a conditional use option, not a zone change. All the counties around us are going with leaving everything ag and making a conditional use the threshold to get approved with other setbacks and other verbiage. We're looking at it, and again, I think to Tom's point, rightfully so, no one in the state, I think, is taking the approach we are, which is we're saying at some scale, this is industrial, no different than Toyota on 1,000 acres, and we think it should be zoned industrial.
But in order to make a decision on a conditional use, you're going to go through many of the same things we're going through here.
Exactly.
We're not-
That's the
we're
Board of
just changing-
Adjustments will have to be doing that.
That is correct.
And I don't think that's what the Board of Adjustments is set up to do.
I guess that's where I was leading, the same thing you were talking about, to burden them or to put that in. That's not my visualization of what the Board of Adjustments are supposed to be doing.
And I think, that's why I think it's admirable that we're trying to address this, but no
Yeah.
one else, everybody else has just kicked it.
Moved it over to a different category, yeah.
So our
And-
challenge is, where's the split?
Yeah,
And it's real, and we said this last month, 50 maybe it is 100, maybe it is 30, but at some threshold,
It-
this is an industrial project. It needs to come before this board.
I promise you, I'm fine with farmers doing whatever they want with their farm. If they do 350 acres, 50 megawatts on their own farm, that's fine. My only question is, once you hook them into the existing farm, I think they ought to force a request for zone change to industrial like the rest of that land. That's all I'm
okay.
asking.
And I just want to clarify a slight variation. These merchant electric generator panels do not feed electricity to that farm.
That's right.
It is being sold to a place like Kentucky Utility,
That's correct.
and we're buying it back from them.
Tom, doesn't contiguous take care of your concern though?
Not necessarily contiguous, because you can have a split of land between them. What I'm saying is, if
Well,
you
they-
look-
Well, they're connected
What's that
somehow,
different?
right?
I don't understand.
They're connected somehow with something.
they're connected into that larger
Oh.
project. is what I'm-
So isn't that contiguous?
Well, we say that in the ordinance. We say with a project
There's
area
3,600
capable of
acres.
producing.
Yeah.
We say that in the
No,
ordinance.
Not that one, but the.
So we're saying it's a project. Now, what what you're trying to, I guess, say is there could be multiple projects that connect together. We're saying
Yes,
it's,
that's what I'm saying.
we're saying it's,
Multiple projects that connect together.
we're saying it's a project as defined by their state application.
We're using an overall global term, and you're down, and it's valid to use that on the small levels, but the reality is overall, it's a project.
So what I'm trying to do is say, if you connect into that larger project, which then forces our fire department to have a different capability in a different part of the county, you understand? Okay, that's a different capability if now, hypothetically, if you force now somebody in Parksville to have a capability to put out an electrical fire, okay, that's not there, that ought to then be zoned with the larger project that it's connected to.
How does, I mean, if you already have a facility, and then you just get, look, I don't,
I'm not trying to argue with you guys.
I don't,
I'm trying to protect the county.
I know, but I'm saying, if it's already there, that you've already, your protection of that does not change.
If this is there and this there then adds to this there.
It doesn't
that's-
affect their
that's what I'm
ability to,
talking about.
I don't,
You get what I'm saying?
I understand, but I still think that's contiguous in my definition. If
Okay,
you're connecting in any way.
can we just say that it connects to it?
Well, I think we're using the word project area, and you can say defined by their state application. I mean, the state's not gonna accept them to have 30 10-megawatt facilities. It's gonna be a 300, and if they're adding another 10 megawatts or 40 meg, they're gonna make an application amendment to the
I
state.
don't know that the state's doing that. I really like Henry's words. It's a simple statement. It's just a simple statement.
Well, I'm fine with putting whatever, and I guess the issue I'm struggling with here is, I don't think that's what is gonna happen, because that's not.
That's not what they're telling you they're gonna do.
No, it's not that, it's just that we're going to get a site plan every time, so there have to be amendment to the site plan. Let's say we had a zone change for 700 acres, and it got approved, and they came in and wanted to do another 10 acres. The idea that they're still doing it under the ag zoning, they have to file a site plan amendment. We're gonna, at that point in time, say, oh, it's another 30 acres. You already got 700 acres zoned ag. Whether it's ag or industrial, I mean, at the end of the day, we're gonna catch it. It's coming to this board. And we can figure out then whether they need to zone it, or if they kept it ag, they still have to do a site plan. They have to still follow the exact same rules. And
Well,
if they've already got 700 acres zoned,
I think we're getting lost in the weeds. I think we need to determine what is an industrial site
that's what I think the core is we need to figure
and,
out.
and what is a non-industrial site. And a non-industrial site, is it 10 megawatts? The state says it's 10. We've made it 50, so is it somewhere in between there? I mean, I can appreciate what you're saying, but I'm thinking,
Actually, yeah,
I think you're splitting hairs here, because I don't think that you can go, like I said, we don't know how this process works. We just know what we've read up to this point and been told. But I mean, for them to go and reapply through the federal and state requirements they have to do to pick up 10 here, 10 here, 10 here, 10 here, 10 here, I think would be,
Yeah, I just don't know that that's an actual requirement for them to have to reapply.
well, you don't know it's not. So maybe we need to find out, but you're making,
Yeah, I'm trying to protect the county as all. By the way, I wasn't arguing about the 50 megawatts. What I said was, hey, we already agreed to that. That's great. Now what if they want to add to that? That's all. And I think Henry's sentence is a simple one-sentence answer.
well, but when you're saying they, there's two different theys right now. The 50 megawatts is a private property owner. And the they you're referring to is a industrial site, is what we're saying. You're combining the two.
That's exactly what I'm doing purposely. I'm saying, if the private owner wants to combine into that larger project, are we gonna then still say the exact?
I guess I have a question, why do we care? He has to put that electricity in the grid somewhere. And if we say it's okay, a private owner can have 40 megawatts, why should we be telling him that he has to go to KU as opposed to someplace?
The reason that we would is because
But the county has to protect it either way, whether he's selling it to KU or he's selling it up the industrial road to an industrial project up the road. I mean, I don't understand the difference.
the reason would be because then the industrial project only has to industrial zone one time, and then can add to its own thing, to its own project, as many other properties as it wants to.
We don't know that, we don't know if that's even a possibility.
If it is a possibility, are you okay with that?
Well,
Yes.
I can't sit around and
So
think,
you're okay with.
I don't even know if
zoning
it,
1,000 acres?
If a private landowner is gonna put in a 40 megawatt facility, and he's got the acreage to do it, and he meets all the state law and the local law requirements, I'm not really concerned whether he sells that directly to KU or to a mile down the road to somebody who's hooked into K2 because it's a large industrial facility. It doesn't change what's happening on the land, it doesn't change to what's going on around it, the people, doesn't change the fire coverage. I mean, it doesn't change anything, it's just, where does that wire go? Where does that?
10 more of those if
I think you're, yeah, well, I think we're talking about something that's very unlikely to
they can
happen.
do it no matter what. What we're saying is they can do it. You're wanting to determine who gets the electricity and who it goes to. That's not our place.
That's actually not what I'm trying to do. What I'm trying to do is I'm looking to foresee their next strategy move. Okay?
So if their strategy is to do 10 megawatts everywhere, and we've already said you can have 50, then what does it matter? I'm with Terry.
If they connect them all together.
So
that gets
what?
around
If it's all private landowners that qualify as merchant electric facility, that's fine. It doesn't change anything on the ground.
If that doesn't change anything on the ground, then why are we even proposing that they have to put 1,000 acres into?
Because there's a hell of a lot of difference between 10 acres and 3,600 acres. That's what we're saying. A contiguous 3,600 acres is a hell of a sight different than 40 acres or 50 acres. If you can't see that, I don't know what,
Use the example.
Well, I certainly can see it. I can see, what if they decide to try to get all those small pieces and put them together?
So let's just use this right here.
they can
This
only.
is Winchester. This
be-
is 60 acres, guys, on I-64. It's 8 megawatts. It doesn't even meet the threshold of a merchant electric generating facility in Kentucky. It's below 10. Question is that an industrial use? Just by your gut.
It's industrial.
Feels industrial, it looks industrial, but it possibly could have been designed differently, that it's still agriculture use. And under our rules, to do that facility, you would need 120 acres, and half of that property would have to stay in agricultural use. That may change the way it feels, but interesting enough, this was actually, this is exempt because
That's 60 acres?
60 acres.
Yeah.
8 megawatts. You look at that picture, you drive up there and you see all that gravel and concrete and steel and you go, that's industrial. That's the
Well,
difference
I don't
here.
know. I could almost,
It goes back to my point, we could almost say anything that meets the definition of a merchant is industrial and give no ag option. The reason we left the ag option in there is to be fair to a smaller project, a smaller farmer that wants to do a facility tied into a smaller substation.
I could live with something like that. So, I mean, if you go to a major horse farm or a cattle farm, you're gonna have things that, those are industrial operations too, so.
They're exempt under the definition, under state law. So, this is what's tricky about us figuring this out. There's a big push, as Mr. Cotton mentioned, I think, well, he told me on the phone, the idea that in Kentucky, we got a state law, it's pretty well written, and then we're deferring to all these local P&Zs. By the way, most of the counties in the state don't have planning and zoning. So in Kentucky, if you're a company, you're gonna come in and you're gonna do something different in Garrett, different in Lincoln, different in Bull, the likelihood of what's gonna happen is it'll just be a state law and we won't have this option. It kind of makes sense down the road, because you can see how this is gonna evolve. We're gonna have 120 different sets of rules in Kentucky. So today, we get to set a standard under the state law, and we're trying to keep it simple. And the site plan, again, I think is the biggest win in that standard. We're gonna get a site plan on every facility, every time. And anytime they would add, they'd have to do an amendment through us. And we're
we
gonna
can
see
make,
engine,
now, I know it's more difficult to make conditions.
it's
a site
harder to make
plan,
conditions. That's the beauty of a zone change or a conditional use permit, if you went that route, is the conditions are easier to impose. And the zone change lets us look at our comprehensive plan and look at a broader slice of our community as we cite. I look at this no different again if Toyota was coming to Bull County and needed 1,100 acres. Clearly, we'd make them zone industrial. And if tomorrow they added another 80 acres,
They'd have to come back,
they'd have to come back. Because we're looking at their project.
and we wouldn't stand in their way. Let's be honest about it.
We wouldn't, and I don't want to stand in their way. I don't. What I'm asking for is if they add to their project, that also then be zoned industrial, that's all.
There's other people want to speak too. I know we've been having.
enough public hearing.
We'll keep going.
Name, address, please.
My name's Jason Cullen, Magistrate 4th District. I'm the one that actually brought this to y'all to ask to talk about this and figure out some good sense ideas. And I know there's been a lot here, but I actually, as the talk's been going on, my mind's been spinning. Steve, can you go back to the picture, the PFG?
You tell me when to stop.
It's the PFG one. Keep going back, keep going, keep going. Jeez, we're getting there.
He's got a lot of
That one?
No, keep going back. When you were saying somebody has to register, keep going. One more, maybe more. Keep going back. Yeah, the state registration, thank you.
There,
This
here.
one right here. So on the right-hand side, you're going to see some things that are that was the technology before. And one of the things that worries me when we start talking about megawatts and acreage and stuff like that is that the technology is changing. We talked about that the last meeting. The technology is changing, and we're going to see smaller panels that are able to collect more. And I honestly, as I was trying to figure this out, how do we do this? Is 50 too big? Is 10 too small? I think Sam kind of hit the nail on the head. Anything that feeds into a merchant, gaining wholesale, that's considered industrial. And you don't have all of the megawatts, this or that, because that's all going to change. I mean, I've got this in my hand, which will do way more than what that cell phone and that big old dish there used to do. That was the thing. So I really think, and I don't know, Henry's law degree is probably better than mine, but just defining that if we're this was the question, if we're doing industrial things on land, we need to have it zoned properly. That's why we have this board here. And that was my request from my district, because there's lots of things that are going to happen with when these things do come out. There's going to be lots of changes to the actual land. And I'm not saying that we have to protect the way the land looks, but we do have to protect those that are going to be around those facilities. My biggest concerns are runoffs, changes in wildlife, various things that will happen with these big, huge projects. So that was my ask, why I asked Steve to bring it to you all to talk about this. But and I objected to the rick houses on agricultural too. So just to be consistent, I said it was corn at one point, it ain't corn no more. So, and I took a lot of heat for that too. But if really, in some ways, we've got to protect agricultural land, because this land will never go back to agriculture. It'll be a disaster when these solar farms are done with it. But here nor there, the idea is that if we keep making exceptions that, okay, you can do this on agricultural, people are going to challenge it, and at some point, this board won't exist anymore because, it's become invalid, and people will sue us and say, well, you let this happen on the agriculture, you let this happen on agriculture. You keep making exceptions, and we're going to be a county that doesn't have planning and zoning. So, like I said, Sam, I kind of like the idea that if it's a business, that's generating into these KU properties, it's all. So anyway, thank you all very much.
Magistrate Cullen?
Sir.
One matter I wanted to bring up, something Steve and I talked about yesterday, and that's kind of the tension between the deadline and the moratorium given to this body to come up with an ordinance as compared to the legislative schedule. I think it's April 14th is the last day that we might see any wiggling on any of the bills. That's, after the governor's had veto days. But
Correct.
That's a ways into the future. And to point out one potential issue, the way these bills might affect whether the state considers aggregate facilities to be contiguous or not, that's something that the commission appears to be relying on. If that were something that might change after we've sent a recommendation for an ordinance, I just think that's something the fiscal court needs to bear in mind.
Of course, and John probably can correct me. We've actually extended the moratorium to what? May 1st. Yeah, so.
But if we're close, the fiscal court's ready to take this, and obviously you guys can tweak it anyway.
Yes, because our original thought and my understanding of the bills that are at the state level right now are pushing it to the local levels and giving them the power to kind of say, this is what's best for your community. We're going to set some minimums, but then from there, it's up to the local level if you've got planning and zoning.
And I am concerned that it may not even clear legislation at all, or go up for vote.
Correct, yeah.
And so now we're hung up in a sense.
I've been surprised by the things that we thought was a slam dunk that have not been brought up.
Yeah.
So, anyway, thank you all. Yes, ma'am.
You made a comment that we should be concerned about our actions or planning and zoning that go away.
Yeah.
Can you clarify what you mean by that?
Well, if we keep making exceptions on it'll be very easy, and Henry might be able to sum this up better, but and I'm not threatening that the fiscal court's going to take away planning and zoning. No, I'm saying legally, if you keep making exceptions, then everything you all do is going to be challenged in court, and at that point, there'll be no reason to have planning and zoning because you've made so many exceptions to rules on what's allowed on agricultural land,
His point's well taken, because right now the state law defines about 5 or 6 uses you can do in the ag zone, under the law. But yet locally, we add other things out there, like Airbnbs, and dog kennels, and shooting ranges, and, rick houses. So we slowly have pushed other uses into the ag zones under our authority. Doesn't exactly match the state law of what agriculture uses. What Jason's saying is at some point, if we just continue to allow everything to occur out in the ag zone, that you can pretty much do pretty much anything, why even have P and Z? Because we're gonna just, we're basically gonna allow uses to go wherever they need to go.
There's no reason for zoning when you have no zones.
When you have
Correct.
no zones.
Correct,
You're
yeah.
not- you're not splitting
Yeah,
zones.
in no way am I threatening that we'll take our ball and leave. No, that's what I greatly appreciate this body, and that's why I'm very interested in these type of things. I think this is what makes Bowl County different than Garrett County and some of our others. And it'll be interesting, I don't know if you guys want to look to see, but tomorrow, apparently Clark County's going to be making their decision on their solar as well. So that would be one to pay attention to as well. So, thank you all.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Name and address,
Good
please.
morning. My name is Mike Ham. I've lived in Danville for 52 years, and I also have land in the county. I'd like to comment on an issue that came up briefly at the last meeting with regard to conversion of land into solar farms, and that is the importance of including wildlife habitat and particularly pollinator habitat. Let me take 5 minutes today and make a case. Pollination is, of course, the process that produces seeds, fruits, and the next generation of plants. Most of our pollinators, most of our important pollinators are declining. many of them precipitously. At least 75% of all flowering plants need help with pollination. In the United States, there are at least 100 crops that require pollination. About 1 bite out of every 3 at our tables, we consume a crop that has required pollination. Let me speak briefly about 2 important pollinators, bees, first of all. Honeybees alone contribute to an estimated $3 to $5 billion in agricultural productivity. More than half of the 4,000 native bees in the United States are declining, and about 1/4 are at the risk of extinction. The native bumblebee, for example, is extremely imperiled. Second example, monarch butterflies. Monarch butterflies are unique in the world. They migrate in the fall, if they survive, 2,500 miles to 11 mountaintops in Michoacan, Mexico. If they survive the winter roost, they come back, breed, move further north, etc. We've lost 90% of this iconic species since 2000. If you look at the west of the Rockies, the situation is even worse. The percentage of monarch butterflies in the west of the Rockies is only 1% of its historic population. Okay? Monarch butterflies, to survive, need milkweed. That's the only thing that they can lay their eggs on. Their caterpillars eat milkweed. That makes them toxic to predators. But like other pollinators, they also require nectar-produced flowers, okay, wildflowers. So, my point is, instead of laying a solar panel, a series of solar panels on gravel or on fescue and orchard grass, if you're going to have solar farms, you ought to at least encourage, if not mandate, some level of wildlife protection, pollinator protection. If you do this, and again, remember that solar installations in the United States, about 6 million acres of land will be added to solar in the next 25 years. By removing existing vegetation and avoiding gravel plots and providing a variety of seed, including perennials, which of course require very, very little maintenance, milkweed, goldenrod, ironweed, Joe Pye weed, bee balm, New England aster, prairie clover. All of these things attract pollinators. They are all perennials, so they require little work. You enhance the beauty of the solar farm. You reduce the maintenance cost. You don't have to mow these plots. And you provide valuable food sources for pollinators that are otherwise declining. A couple of examples and then I'll quit. In Minnesota, to give you one example, more than half of all of the solar farms that have come into existence, and by 2017 there were 4,000 acres, had included a pollinator habitat. In California, the largest farm, the Topaz installation that supplies energy for 175,000 homes and businesses, protects 20,000 acres of habitat. Thanks to the initiative taken by U.S. Fish and Wildlife and the University of Illinois at Chicago, we've developed something called CCAAs, Candidate Conservation Agreements with Assurances. These are voluntary contracts between energy companies, whether solar or other, and transport, railways, roadways, etc., guaranteeing that they will either protect wildlife habitat, pollinator habitat, or enhance it. And the benefit they get is that if these species are ever listed on the endangered species list, and we're talking here about unlisted species, They will not be required to do anything in addition if they've taken these proactive measures. Last I looked, more than 50 energy companies and transport companies had signed up. In Kentucky, Columbia Gas, which is headquartered in Lexington and which, excuse me, operates, I think, in 30 counties and has something like 2,600 miles of pipeline, is doing a really good job in providing habitat for pollinators in its ROWs, its rights of way. So what I'm asking here is, you know, I know you're grappling with how best to allow solar farms to colonize in Boyle County. Please consider doing everything you can to make sure that these farms include some wildlife habitat and particularly pollinator habitat. Every little bit helps. It's important. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Steve, is that addressed at all at the state law level? No?
I think it was pointed out the last meeting, keep going back to the slide, but I think the Lancaster facility right here, I think right here, there's, see, it says proposed pollinator, and I think what was testified wasn't from us, it was from a citizen, that they incorporated some pollinator footprint at the front door, and I think the comment was that doesn't seem to be enough, and it just felt like there's a component of that in there, but it just doesn't do a whole lot. It's pretty up the front door. So that's the facility in Lancaster. You can see there's going to be a slight little, it says proposed pollinator plantings right there, and then ties into the landscape buffer, which is right to be along 30 times. It's right in this area. So the scale of it was described at last meeting. Maybe that's an important component, but maybe this wasn't sufficient on that one. And again, that's just a judgment call on it. We do not have any verbiage in ours in that area, and the state law doesn't, it's not required under the state law. It would be a design feature that the applicant or property owner would build into the property. I'll get back to our ordinance right there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please state your name and address.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, please. Ann Ferguson, 645 Kings Mill Road, Danville. I thank Mike Ham for bringing to your attention the importance of pollinators. Do any of you know Senator Hornback? Do you know him? He is a grain farmer in Shelby County. He has serious concern about farmland, and he has serious concern about solar facilities. His bill, Senate Bill 69, moved out of committee last week as a comm sub, and it was on the floor long enough for amendment, and then it was sent back to Natural Resources and Energy. Last night, I read an article where Senator Hornback was interviewed, and also Tom Fitzgerald of the Kentucky Resources Council. Both of them are optimistic about the passage of Senate Bill 69. Maybe it won't look exactly the way it did when it was introduced, because people have had suggestions to make, comments to make, amendments to make. So we won't know until the bill is passed exactly how the solar facilities will be addressed. Some of you remember from pipeline days of an agency called FERC, Federal Energy Resources. Several of us had lots of contact with them by mail, email, phone, various ways during the pipeline controversy. FERC still has something to say about solar facilities. And there, as people have referenced, there is a state agency through which these developers, energy developers, have to move. So keep those things in mind. At the same time, listen to Senator Hornbeck, who has encouraged local planning and zoning commissions to set their own rules. And I encourage you to set your own rules for the development of our county farmland. I understand from listening today that some of you have different opinions, and I respect all of those opinions. And really, having sat through many planning and zoning commission meetings where there was utter and complete silence, I have to be a little bit pleased that you all are talking together and considering together. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else want to speak? Yes, sir. Please state your name and address.
I really wasn't going to say anything, but I've sat here and listened, and I appreciate it. I'm John Kaywood. I'm magistrate of the 6th District. I'm here just as an individual to listen. Don't represent the court in any way. I hope you all are around for a long, long time. I thank you for what you do. I know it's difficult, but let me tell you, it makes it a whole lot easier for us as an elected official to have you all do and what you do in your research and the discussions that you have. And that's why I enjoy listening to you. And I just want to thank you. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Since there's no more public, I guess there's no more public input. So,
I stepped out, Mr. Cullen briefly again, just to clarify. The fiscal court, again, asked us to put something together, has a moratorium in place with the directive that we put some rules together. The goal here is to get something to the fiscal court to give them time for the moratorium lapse, but they're gonna be mindful of that legislative process too, because things could change on a dime. Let's say the bill changes dramatically or doesn't change. But they need some time to do what we're doing, and the process for a zone change versus a text amendment is slightly different. For a zone change, they have a 90-day window. They have to take up some action on your all's recommendation. On a text amendment, we send it to them, and they can change it, tweak it, wordsmith it, or reject it. That's what fiscal court can do, and that's what's kind of happened in some counties around us. So we need to sort of make a decision on where we want to be on our text amendment, send it to fiscal court, and then let them sort of probably work through the similar process on a lot of these same issues. And I'm sure they will, because there's some different opinions on some things. Or we could just table it, wait till the table another month, see if the legislation moves a little further, we can get some more clarity on that issue.
So
We have to integrate some parts into our ordinance. But
if you consider the legislative activities, which could go all the way to April, mid-April timeframe.
we honestly, we wouldn't meet then until after that, and give the court literally a week to.
Yeah, and that's what, I mean, the push and shove here, but, you know, aspects of the decommissioning, which I think the state level is going to address, isn't going to be clear until we get closer to that time period. Or maybe we'll not get lucky and it'll be days before that time frame in April. But it becomes a significant part of it. We wouldn't be meeting then prior to doing that, because if you talk about our timing is, we generally, at the end of the month, we meet.
Both bills take the whole decommissioning process and make it a state process.
Yes.
And give us some local footprint there if we wanted to. But I think it's clear from meeting with the advisory committee and the discussions we had that we were not going to weigh in on the decommissioning aspect. We deferred to the state law.
And so what you got written here then, because we're tying into the state law, would be you expect it'll cover that topic.
It appears so.
Okay.
I've got the bill there, and again, Senator Hornback bill really doesn't really address P and Zs at all, really.
No.
Because we were already referenced in the state law right there under section 3, I believe, or it's down below the next one. Yeah, so they're not changing anything in the law right now, right there. That's been in the law since,
Yes.
I don't know, 90s or early 2000s. The law just says that we are allowed then to do other things as far as setbacks and other standards. So none of that's being changed in the law. None of this is changing our authority under the law. Only thing that's being added to Senate Bill 69 is what the state's going to do under notification and the decommissioning process and other certifications that have to happen at the state level. All the verbiage that's in that bill is not even being proposed to be amended as far as local P and Zs, which is what really everything we do is right here in this one section. It says we can do other things, so. I don't anticipate that changing, and so I think our verbiage kind of still works.
Mhm.
We're still back to the same point, do we want to have a two-tiered process or not?
Yes, sir.
I would recommend that we go to, what do we care about? The land use. We don't care how many megawatts are there. If the technology changes and I can set a black box behind my barn that generates 10 megawatts or 40 megawatts, we don't care. We just care about the 4x6 area that it takes up. So I think we should regulate by acre instead of by megawatt. Because that's what you care about. Is it 3,000 acres or is it 10 by 10 square feet that you don't care about?
And, I like that, and whether or not it's private use or whether it goes into the commercial. Right. Right?
Well, the problem with that, is if I have a farm and I'm getting old and I want to go into solar production instead of whatever I'm growing now, then regulate me by the acre, let me sell some of my acres under your regulations or lease them, whatever, to supplement my income. Don't.
Right, but that income is no longer farming, that income is industrial. That's, and that should be legal, that should be legal for you to sell however much of your farm you want, or lease it, but that is now industrial, right?
Well, when you grow,
Or to ask for it to be rezoned, is all I'm saying.
when you grow corn and you sell it to a distillery, it becomes industrial. So are you an industrial operation when you're growing that corn?
No, you're not,
Okay.
but you're,
I don't think that's the way to approach this.
You know, that's an interesting point, so I think this gets back to what, again, it is in the weeds, but what is an industrial use? We think of it as GM, Toyota, but industrial, as defined in our ordinance, is very clear. It's the processing. You're either an industrial service or you're an industrial manufacturing. So industrial means that you're processing. We get this question all the time. If a guy's out there sanding on guns out in the county and he's refurbishing old guns, is he a manufacturing or process, or is he a service, or is he an
The
industrial
state
use?
has made exceptions for all kinds of products
We
that they
never-
now call agriculture.
But we never look
They've
at the
listed
fact,
4 or 5 things they've added to the amendments that say, now this is agriculture.
but we never look at the
So
retail
It's
sale.
not just what you're saying.
We don't look at the sale as a determination whether it's an industrial use. We look at the process and the physical use. So if you're out there refurbishing guns that you take to a gun sale every month at some convention center, you still might be an industrial use in the violation out there because you're processing stuff. So the issue here is the solar farm, under the state definition, is a use that's producing power that's being sold wholesale into the grid. There's a clear definition in the state law of what a merchant generating facility is. If you're not 10 megawatts on 10 acres and selling into the grid wholesale as your primary use, you're not a facility under our ordinance
Now, and
at all. We're not regulating those other things at all under our ordinance.
The-
Those are just accessory uses to your property. Whether you're industrial, Daniel's got panels out there. Those aren't anything to us other than an accessory part of their factory, just like a storage building would be, or their parking lot would be. So the primary use is what we always look at, and And if it's your farm, the primary use is a residence and a farm, and then if you have 300 acres of panels and 5 chicken barns, those are all accessory to you, whatever you're doing. Now, if you're selling that power to a neighbor or to the grid, you're either gonna meet this definition or not under state law. We're only allowed to regulate this definition under the state law. So that facility is clearly defined as 10 megawatts, 10 acres, selling power into the grid at wholesale cost, not regulated by the Public Service Commission. There's a difference there too.
So even the farmer that has 800 acres and he wants to use 400 of it, but once he sells it to the grid, he's in business too, but we're just exempting him. He's an industrial operation, but we're just exempting that, just like we exempt other operations on farms.
So I don't know, and again, this gets into the weeds, I don't know if you can sell into the grid. I think you can net meter back into the grid with credits. I don't think anyone's allowed to sell into the grid unless you're this type of facility.
Wholesaler.
The definition for the grid is what they're talking about here into that grid work. You're describing me selling my electricity back to my local utility.
Yeah.
Whoever provided that, Intercounty Electric or KU in this county.
I don't think you can sell it, you
And
can
you,
meter it back.
that's
for a
different,
credit.
that's a different category, because they're regulated by the public utility at the rate that they're buying it from you. So if you're gonna do merchanting, you're selling it at, this is what my cost is, and we're gonna negotiate a contract on what this is
So
for the
you're
price.
saying there's a difference.
There's a difference.
So, I mean, but what you're saying is, you don't care how much, you can have 800 acres if you're selling it back to KU, but if you're selling it wholesale, you're all of a sudden become
I didn't mean to tell you
industrial?
that, I was answering your question.
No, I'm not,
but
but I'm
it's valid.
asking a very,
I believe there's a level of size that makes it industrial.
okay.
And the
that's-
number that we have in here is a good number, is what I believe.
You think the 50 megawatts is,
It's, at this point, I'm using the same characteristics that the state is using it, because I don't know that there's a better term that can
the
be
state
easier to
says
find.
10.
Yeah.
State's saying
Yeah.
10.
Well, that was my plan B. I just.
We're
didn't
saying
know if there-
50.
I think it's a reasonable grace, is what it is.
Okay.
I
So-
don't want to discourage the use of solar panel energy in some fashion.
All
I
right.
think it's basically a good
So
thing. I
what you're
don't want
saying-
it next to my property as close as what it could be.
All right. Well, at today's, just like Chairman Boyd said, in 10 years from now, you may be able to generate 50 megawatts with something as big as this
But
table. But
the
right
way
now,
you-
it takes 350
The
acres.
panels are not the only part of that, of course. It's the electrical interface to where you got to connect. So if you're building a large amount of wet megawatts in a very small area, the feeder wire network may not be any smaller, or the transformers they have to do to step this voltage up. Because it is a low voltage, and they step it up to get it so that it can be conformed into AC, into the system. So there's a whole bureaucracy of sub-electrical panels that go with this. That they're also, if you're
So-
looking there, it's inside those
So
fenced
you're-
areas.
I guess your concerns is how the electricity is being sold, whether it's being sold commercially. You don't care how much land it takes to do it. You don't have any other concerns about it. You're just concerned whether it's a private
Oh.
or an industry that's doing it.
You're wrong with that. I am concerned about the large number of acreage. I am concerned about that. I'm also concerned about the placement of that ground area around the perimeter. We did not start in the county with these types of large merchant solar farms, but now you're going to suddenly have an agricultural area, which is a beautiful country area, and if it's not handled correctly, every time I look out my back window, all I'm going to see is solar panel.
Yeah.
It's a good point, because what Sammy said is the key parts of our ordinance are the setbacks, the landscaping, the berms, the site plan. The zone change is important too, because we could end up with more conditions, and that's where we get to define into the use. But the key here is really what we always do, which is build compatibility for incompatible uses, is what we're trying to do here.
And I think it's a good thing to do. I think that in the future, if you look at what we have to do in the US, we have to make use of energy sources. We're not going to get any particular wind towers or generators because we're not in the wind stream. Solar is one of those categories that can be done here. And I'm expecting and anticipating, just like you, our technology is going to reduce the size of the footprint of that. But until I get there, The footprint is what it is
Well, what
today.
happens when that happens, and then you've got what you've got 3,600 acres of obsoleteness.
It is what it is. We have that, we buy a car and we don't replace it every year. We take a worn-out car for 3 to 5 years because it can't afford to replace it. That's business. They'll have the same issue.
Isn't that why we have the regeneration or part? Decommission.
I think the decommission, there's no way that we can decommission.
We should never, I just need to know that it's taken care of.
There's no way in God's
Absolutely.
green earth that we can do
I'm
that.
not saying that we're gonna, I'm saying that's why the state's saying that.
We don't control what the state does. I mean, we can't make hopefully it'll,
I'm in agreement.
Actually,
That's what I'm saying.
But-
That's why that's in the law.
it's not in the law. There is no law. Well, as I say, but we don't know whether it is or isn't.
and that's where I was talking about, like, same thing you're alluding to. That could be all the way into April before the state resolves it, if they resolve it. And what do we do if it isn't? You've got a small chance that it's not gonna come out. There won't be a decommissioning, and it's like, folks, this is that nasty balance we gotta get.
And there's no way we can do it.
Absolutely. There is no way that we need to, at the county level, we should ever do that.
From a timing standpoint, I think we can send something to fiscal court that's 99% ready. And if decommissioning doesn't end up in state law and the fiscal court wants to add a paragraph on that, that's up to them. Hopefully, if they add it, it's fiscal court's responsibility, not the
Well,
planning commission, 'cause I also agree. I don't think we are in a position financially or staff-wise to even think about that we could handle a decommissioning process that would incur a bonding requirement 20 to 30 to 50 years in the future.
Correct.
We barely manage subdivision bonds 3 years into the future.
Yeah.
It'd be really complicated for us to think, that's a state responsibility if I ever heard one, so hopefully that's where it sticks. I think it will, because clearly that's what's in both bills, it's moving. And the House bill version went all the way through the House with no debate on that same paragraph, it just got added in the Senate bill.
So I guess,
I made a plan B here, and I'm not sure it'd be very popular, but I just slid it over to Henry. Maybe debating this ag industrial, I kind of agree. I think we all agree. At some level, these are industrial uses. I think we all agree on that. And we're trying to decide whether it's 10 megawatts, 50, or maybe it's 100, or it's acres. But maybe the plan, a simpler plan, is just to make all merchant generating facilities industrial.
Absolutely.
That's the simplest thing to do.
It would make it, it'd be
gets
simpler,
rid of the acreage.
but I just want to be clear. That means even a small farm facility, everyone's going through a zone change that we know is a pretty high bar.
If you're going into the merchant, right?
We would say it's an industrial use. So the way that would work, if you guys just real quickly spin around, if you see it, you would just cross the X out. Right there, or the P, that becomes a blank, which means it's not allowed in the ag district. The Ps are already there. You just say, all merchant generating facilities in unincorporated Board County shall be located in industrial zone. And then you take out the paragraphs here that say anything about ag.
Do we have a definition of merchant generating
Right
facility?
here at the top, it's within the state laws, which is whatever it is right here. There's the state law right there. That's exactly what's in that state
that's right.
law. It's 10 megawatts, wholesale, not regulated by Public Service Commission. So we just say, if you're that, thou shalt be an industrial every time. The farmers are not gonna like that. They obviously don't feel the same about that. But if the technology changes, it doesn't matter to us. It says if you're that, which is a state law, thou shalt be industrial in Boyle County.
Well, I mean, like I said, I've been all over this. I'm conflicted. I think you should have the opportunity to do what you want with your land. I personally don't think solar panels is the best use of 3,600 acres of prime farm, or any kind of farmland. I don't think it, personally, I don't think it is. But again, if you've got 1,000 acres and you just want to run 10 cattle on it, that's not efficient either, but that's your right and privilege. So it's, I'm conflicted on a lot of layers of this, but I think, it obviously is industrial at some point, and I think maybe the definition says it all. If you're selling something, if you're selling it wholesale,
The acres is incidental. And again, we just saw a 60-acre facility that's 8 megawatts, doesn't even meet the threshold. It clearly looks industrial, so it's gonna come down to the design every single time. Until we get a project and we see a plan, we're really, us trying to figure out what's ag or industrial or not, maybe the simpler way is just, they're all industrial.
I mean, because land use is what this, is what we're supposed to be concerned about.
You know, it is always best to keep it simple.
That's real simple, but that's really strict.
It's a really scary one is what it is, because
It was
it's,
simple before, let's just say that. It was simple before because we said if you were that, you just had a 500-foot setback. We already had a rule.
right?
And we added everything in red that you see. So we already had a standard. It just had,
Mr. Chairman, I've been all over this philosophically too. You should be able to do what you want to do on your own land, that's a human right. You know, I get it. But it's industrial. When you make that choice, then you're moving from agricultural to industrial. So I like his plan B.
let's say it's Henry's plan B.
I think it did for you.
We,
Or the court's plan B. We'll call it the fiscal court. I don't know, maybe we do need the table, come back next
I-
month, I could rewrite it up, you could have 2 versions in front of you, maybe.
I think that's
What
wise.
do y'all think?
What-
Rather than
what-
trying to amend it
what-
here.
I think we need to sleep on it, yes.
Commissioner Mann, what did you think?
That sounds
We
good,
will.
I'd have 2 versions if there's.
I'd say that's 2 versions, yeah, that we would vote on, yeah.
Everybody's
Sound good?
consensus that let's,
This also would be the time if there's any comments on the distances around that you got in some of the other paragraphs.
Yeah, I mean, any of that's.
Any of the paragraphs down there, the 750 feet or whatever, 500 feet, those category numbers should also be discussed, or make sure that those are satisfactory.
so
Mr.
do
Col-
we need a motion to table? I'm sorry, Henry, go
I
ahead.
had just one housekeeping revision that relates to setbacks, and that would be to add some language, maybe toward the top, that says, merchant electric generating facility infrastructure, except for power lines connecting facilities to regulated utility facilities, shall be considered structures as defined in and for the purposes of this ordinance. And I think when you categorize something as a structure, that's what triggers setbacks, and that's also integral to the kind of screening requirements we have. The screening and buffering all talk about structures, so I just want to make sure we establish that it's all structures.
Yes, I like that addition.
So did we table this?
We need a motion.
I'd like to make a motion.
All right, we have a motion to table,
I'll second it.
and we have a second. All in favor? Motion passes. Okay. Now, we're not done.
All right. The subdivision regulations are next.
Good discussion, though.
Yeah, that was
Thank you.
great.
Good discussion.
Thank you.
Let's get on through to that. Let's move on
I
through.
have a comment I want to make, if you don't mind. I'm with her. That 60 acre ones that make 8 megawatts, they got 4 generation or something. It must have, the power company out here has 35 acres, makes 20 megawatts.
I'm taking him on now.
Okay.
All right, so.
We need a motion, don't we? Or you say, or we're still on this discussion?
Did you guys vote on the tabled motion?
Yeah.
Yeah, we
We
already
tabled
voted.
it,
Yeah, so now we're on the subregs.
but we have to,
I'll bring it off the table,
Yeah.
correct? Yep.
we need a motion.
Move to bring the subregs off the table into discussion.
Motion made, motion seconded by Commissioner Sleet. All in favor? Unanimous. Do we-
So, hopefully this goes quicker. We went through this in great detail last month. The subregs, as you all heard, is months and months of discussion through a committee, through the staff, with Henry, the advisory committee. And this is revisions to Article 3, 5, and 6. 3 is just really simple about the bonding option, giving developers 2 bonding options. 5 is the road standards. 6 is inspection standards. All these documents are pretty much ready to go. You all make final approval of those. Those don't go to any government body. And it's been looked at by a development group, and the challenge here is I think we all kind of are in a pretty good place with a lot of the standards, or if not all, the rewording, the verbiage. But the challenge we have is if we're ready to move forward with an amendment to the subregs, the timing of that and the effective date issue, because we got projects like you just saw, Shelby Green, others where they're building and designing streets under a set of rules that we're getting ready to change somewhat dramatically. So we're gonna have to figure out how we're gonna kind of bridge that gap between old rules and new rules and projects in the pipeline, for example. So again, I'll be glad to answer any questions. Y'all have had them for a while, but from the staff standpoint, we're ready to move forward with the subregs amendment for these 3 chapters.
Steve, could I ask a side question on Article 5? We've got a lot of references to Planning Commission doing things, meaning your group, for example, doing it. Do you have the manpower and activities to do that?
No, but it's required. We have to do
Yeah,
it.
because we're just adding at least 8 different callouts that the Planning Commission will have to follow up on.
We do it now. I mean, every street
know.
project that comes in, we bond it. We somewhat inspect it. We have to coordinate with the city and the county to get these inspections done, work with the developer. We're adding a lot of new testing, certification, oversight, but that's needed. It's just part of the process. Every planning commission is in the subdivision regulation business, and whether you got a staff of 1 or 30.
I realize that. I
gotta
just
get this
pointed
done.
out that that's what happens. On a rule of thumb, although we can't always project the cost impact associated with these things, adding this additional characteristic of the roads and standards, is that a double the price cost of doing it, triple the price?
We talked about that in the committee quite a bit. We're not adding more pavement width, we're adding some depth, we're adding some oversight, some testing, wider sidewalks, but we have a whole bunch of in lieu of options. So yeah, we're adding costs to the linear foot of a street, obviously. We couldn't really get to an analysis of that. We talked about that as a committee. Several engineers were on that committee. It's just be hard to sort of put that in dollars, and we'd almost have to mock up 1,000 linear feet. But we've got so many flexible options now, there may be some cost savings here or there. For example, we allow sidewalks on one side of some streets, on through streets. We no longer have to mandatory on cul-de-sacs. There's a whole bunch of kind of wiggle room for sidewalks, curb and gutter, different options, street lights. So there may be some cost savings, but clearly, and Jeff's a developer, and maybe some of y'all know the details, but by adding a little bit more of this, and more inspection and oversight and wider sidewalks, we are obviously adding more cost to that infrastructure in the right way.
It's a good way to get an incremental improvement in the quality without significant cost. It may not be even in the cost structure, just a normal cost of living type of things. So thank you. It's a
We're going
nice
to
way to do
5-foot
that.
sidewalks in the city on both sides, but we're not doing that in the county or in the smaller cities. There's a little bit of debate on
By
that.
virtue of, I mean, there is significant cost by virtue of how we do what we do. I mean, curbs, gutters, sidewalks, all those things that you see in neighborhoods all over this community that don't have them. And when you require them, there's definitely a cost that goes to that.
Yeah, there will be.
And well, there is now, and there's going to continue to be. So it's, and all those things, which, those all affect the cost of housing. And we want to be, housing friendly. That's, houses where jobs go at night. And to get jobs, you need to have housing, affordable housing. And we don't have affordable housing, but we've always regulated ourselves out of affordable housing in this community. So,
Give you a good example, right in your bond statements that you guys looked at earlier, your letters of credit. There's one in there for 1,000 feet of street. That's $523,000 bond we're holding. And that doesn't include water, that's just sewer, because there's already water there. And that didn't include sidewalks because they're exempt on that street because it's an industrial street. So, but the width, we build them the same standard. So there's $523,000 for 1,000 linear feet of street under the old rules that we just bonded last year. Jody Sharp just did 700 foot of feet street with a cul-de-sac that I think was close to $300,000 with sidewalks on one side. So to the chairman's point, there's costs associated with our standards that have to be borne by the developer and eventually end up in the lot costs and the cost of housing in this community. So the standards are being tweaked a little, but not much. Again, we're still sticking with the old rules, 8, 2, and 1, 8 inches of base or sub base, 2 inches of base, 1 inch final surface. We're going to 8, 2.5, 1.5. So we're adding another 1/2 inch of base and 1/2 inch of final surface. But there's costs with that, obviously, but we're not making the roads wider. We actually give an option where a developer can make the roads narrower if they will designate their parking preference on the street. So in this option that we've had in this chart right here, there's a lot of asterisks on that chart. The lane widths are still 10 foot, 20 foot of pavement. But if the developer will designate and sign on the front end, say there'll be no on-street parking, we'll let that reduce down to 18 foot.
And I will say, the city engineer went out, I think, out of his way to create options where it's not just a cookie cutter.
Yeah.
There are options if you want to be creative. You can, so that everything doesn't look the same, and have some creativity in your development, which I think was and it wasn't easy for him to do, and it was.
No, I think
Those are the asterisks that you see right below that chart. That chart we've never had a chart with all the standards. It was all spread out through the book. The chart are the rules. All those asterisks are kind of those flexible options, 1 through 5, for sidewalks, curb and gutter, street lights, pavement widths. There's a lot of flexibility built in here if the developer chooses to take those options. Most of the design standards up there, how we design streets, turning radiuses, stopping distances, most of that stuff's still the same. Right-of-way widths, pavement widths, a lot of those are staying the same. But we did change the up and down width or structure of the street, and we've added a whole component of inspections and standards and certifications that we've never had in this community.
Well, as complicated as it might seem, this is really much better than what we had before. It's the nature of the subject, so just putting it down so people can follow it in an easier, quicker fashion is valuable.
One beauty of it too is because it's our document, it becomes the community law, but if we have to make a tweak to it 6 months from now, it's simply we need to bring it back to you all and make the change. I mean, it's subdivision regulations are pretty easy to amend. We just would work with the engineers and make the change. I think we're ready to go on it. Again, the challenge is how do we word this and put this in effect to build a little bit of wiggle room for folks that are already designing projects under the old standard, as opposed to them have to re-engineer their whole project and, do we make it effective today? Do we make it effective July 1? Do we make it effective on the preliminary plat or submission of the construction plans? There's a lot of different, and Henry has been thinking through that too.
Well, and as Steve said, another conundrum we have is, these plans that were submitted, they have 3 years.
That's right.
So what do? We could possibly have something that's been approved, and then 2 years from now or 3 years from now, it's being built and designed by the old standards. After we've had 2 years of, so that's what we have to address, how we navigate.
Mr. Chairman, I have a proposed language that would deal with that issue and just a few other spots for some housekeeping matters. With regard to plans that have been submitted, I think Steve and I had talked about letting the submission of construction plans, that's what's going to guide what standards apply. And I think what you said was there are only maybe 3 projects kind of on the shelf right now where there's a plat submitted and the effective date of design standards is going to affect the cost of their streets. So what I would suggest is go into Section 5 or Article 5, which is the design and improvement standards. make that section 5.1 purpose and effective date, and then add a sentence at the end. It would read like this: construction plans for plats approved prior to ratification of this article and submitted before, date of your choosing, shall be governed by the prior design and construction standards. And we talked about setting that date, and the commission's choice, July 1st.
June, July, whatever.
Yeah.
90 days from now, whatever.
It's more lenient for the builder.
Well, let's go.
It'd be cheaper for the builder. Why wouldn't we allow him to go with the new standards was developed?
The bonding is what provides better flexibility to the builder, and that's not what I'm talking about affecting. What I'm talking about is street design, which is the pavement depth and things like that.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about.
So if we change that, then they have to, the engineers have to go back and redesign what's already been submitted.
We've already got 4 projects with new road sections that are, today makes 4 with Shelby Green. That's been designed, that's an engineering document. We don't have the construction plans yet. If we were to change the rules today, we'd have to verify that they made them under the new standards. Those were built under the old standards. And I think we just have to make a decision. We're gonna let some of these ones in the pipeline go forward under the old rules. And when we make the trigger.
When you
for-
say pipeline, you mean what's already been submitted or what's floating out there?
No, these are all, right now, all these are preliminary plats we have.
Okay, so what's gonna keep someone from rushing something in between now and, if we
That's,
put a moratorium on it, or?
no, I think if we word it right, according to Henry, we could take more preliminary plats, but at some point make it very clear that a set of construction plans is under the new rules.
What
But you're right, they could rush them in then. We said July 1. We could get 10 sets filed next month, and I guess that's just part of what happens.
What I've proposed would cut it off at plats that have been approved as of today, or whenever we ratify. We could take that out and allow for a big cattle call of plats.
Why
and-
would you do that if we're gonna have new standards?
Right,
Well,
yeah.
because I'll tell you, we don't have a preliminary plat yet on one subdivision I'm thinking of. It's almost done, but they just hadn't turned in the preliminary plat.
I think you gotta give them a little window.
But they've engineered their drainage, they've engineered their street, it's done. They just haven't filed the plat. It just didn't get here this month.
Maybe they need to do that.
So if we make it effective today with the preliminary plat submittals, they've got to go back to the drawing board 100% on the engineering. Because we have changed this a little bit. But they may want to because some of the flexible options they didn't have before.
Gotta set a date.
Got to set a date.
Yeah, well, I don't want the scenario where, like you said, you got a bunch of stuff coming in, and you're working under 2 different guidelines.
I like Henry's idea of the preliminary plat. We just set a date and they either come in or they don't. But the problem with the preliminary plat is the ones Shelby Green that we just got, they have 3 years to turn in their construction plans.
Right.
Once they turn in the construction plans, it might be another year before they submit the bond. It may be 2 more years before they start the project. So we're talking 6 years down the road, we're still letting someone build under the old rules by using the preliminary plat. But that's the danger of using the preliminary plat as your threshold. Because preliminary plat has no relationship to construction. It could be 3 to 5 years. If you use the construction,
Plan be better?
we've got construction plans have been turned in on Team Leaders project 2 years ago.
Can we sunset anything that's, at some point, that's been presented to us or going to be presented to us?
I think that's what we talked about, that the construction plans we have to kind of get started. The construction has to commence within, I don't know, that's what we were kicking around, how we do that on maybe the plans we already have.
Great idea. If you were building and somebody came to you and said, hey, you've got this preliminary plan, construction plan in, but you haven't started yet, we're gonna give you until this time, what would be fair?
I think we may want to say, well, yeah, construction needs to, really, the construction plans is what's most fair.
I think it's got to be by submission. I think for construction plans that are already submitted, if we say, we've approved your plans, but you need to start construction soon, I think that's going to raise a lot of litigation.
Well, I mean, so when you say soon, you don't think you put any time limit?
I think we can say construction plans submitted after July 1 have to meet the rules.
Right, that's the thing. It's the submittal that I think we use as the deadline. For construction plans that we've already approved, I think we would cause problems for ourselves by
But what
saying
about
we've already
any-
approved.
What about any construction plans that you may approve between now and June the 1st?
Right,
Why
that's,
would you do that? Why would we vote on this now and then let them submit a construction plan under old?
Because they've
They've already spent their own personal money significantly.
Right, but it's,
But if they haven't submitted it, you don't know when they're gonna submit it.
We don't police that. We get a preliminary plat, they have 3 years to turn in their plans. It's all one
There's
connected
always gotta
project.
be a date, right?
Well, and think about it, the preliminary plat starts the process. They designate the right of way, like you just saw in Shelby Green, it showed sidewalks. They kind of set the process, and they have 3 years to turn in their plans. They don't have to turn them all in, they can turn in just a portion of that.
do they have the option to use either one? Or are they locked into one or the other?
I think they, if we adopt the new regulation, I think they have the option to do it under the new standards, but I think the plans you just saw were built under the old standards.
Yeah.
Because it's gonna be cheaper for the,
So potentially you've got 3 years worth of,
possibly, 4 projects that have a 3-year window right now.
The best view maybe have is, we're going where we should go. That's probably the best we can
I think you just gotta set a
say.
date, saying submission of construction plans after this date have to follow the new rules. And if they turn them in, they turn them in. That's the only way we can really police it.
What's the
Okay.
difference then between 1 month versus 2 months versus 3 months? Like, if we vote on this today, this is February, and tell them that they've got until April to submit a construction plan, is that unreasonable? Under the old rules? And then anything that comes after that, I guess, why would we go April 1st versus May 1st versus June 1st versus July 1st? What's the?
I'll give you an example. We don't have the construction plans yet for the Danville Hose project that we just approved for the zone change to the townhomes. The zone change just got finalized last week. They're working on the construction plans. I don't know what that takes an engineer to do. It might take him 3 months. He's got to work with gas company. There's drainage issues, design. They come in when they come in. If we all of a sudden say, May 1's your cutoff, you know, to be fair to that engineer, he's been working on those plans for a year. There's a lot of moving parts to get your construction plans done and cost.
but the changes between them, the old and the new, I mean, shouldn't be that difficult for him.
It's a little bit of cost in the pavement cost, and then obviously, the sidewalk issues, kind of a big deal on that one, so. Don't know what they're gonna choose, but we'd almost have to talk with every engineering firm, put them on notice, that this is happening, they know this.
Yeah, this has been going on for, we've been doing this for,
Almost a year.
yeah.
I think you just gotta pick a day to go with it.
And engineers have been involved in the committee, so they know it's coming too.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
Y'all just gotta make a decision on that.
Seems like 90 days should be out.
That's kind of where we were leaning from the get-go. That'd be June 1st, is that right? March, April, May, June 1.
and so what was Henry's recommendation?
My recommendation was actually two-tiered for construction plans for plats that are approved prior to ratification of this article, and which construction plans are submitted by that June 1 date, shall be governed by the old standards.
Is everybody okay with that?
I think that's a pretty good clarification, yes.
Do we want to push the plat submission date out further? Okay. Getting pretty specific here. Okay. Ratification of this article and construction plans submitted by June 1st.
Mr. Chairman, I want to say, being new to the commission, I've watched this whole amendment thing, since I've gotten here, and I'm impressed. I mean, I'm impressed how the staff has done this. I've sat and watched them talking to the engineers, in committee meeting. This is impressive.
I think Steve needs to be commended. They've met, every month?
Every Friday for about 6 months.
And it wasn't always easy.
That's pretty easy. I mean, I just told them what I wanted, and they argued, that's it.
Well, I mean, getting everybody, I mean,
The committee was great, though, Jeff, the whole developer committee was unique, this process, and then there was a group of engineers, about 8 of us, and then it was, I mean, we're talking about stuff I have no clue about. These engineers were debating drainage ditches and backfilling trenches,
and Henry was at every one as well, so.
so that committee was so great, so. I'm just glad we're getting it done, moving off our list, if you guys see fit to approve it today with those. So, recommendations.
All right, I guess we're waiting for a motion.
Why- I'm sorry.
Okay.
Move it with Henry's amendment.
Let him speak.
Well, I do have a couple other
Okay.
changes, questions. Page 5.9, subsection H, talking about substreets. It says that there can be exceptions to the requirement of substreet if the adjacent use is incompatible. And I just wondered, I think that's something we ought to consider, whose discretion over compatibility we're considering here.
What section is that, Henry?
Page 5.9.
So we have a substreet policy that we allow exceptions. And so, for example, if there was an apartment complex being built and there was substreet and a neighborhood next door, normally we'd say you have to connect the streets, but if the uses are incompatible, you all would, through the preliminary plat submittal, could make an exception to the substreet policy. So I think, Henry, it's always going to be identifying it, that this body will be making a determination.
Okay.
It'll happen with the plat.
And you refer to the planning commission in making that decision, which is this body, I believe.
So right now, if you have two substreets, you connect them, but there's exceptions. We want to create exceptions because there's just certain circumstances we want to make that connection.
Completely agree.
This is the type of matter that I've not seen any kind of dispute over around here, and I've seen lots of dispute over elsewhere.
I've seen lots of dispute over this elsewhere.
I'm earmarking it for future consideration, and the issue elsewhere has been, what's your criteria? What determines compatibility? Is it financial difficulty? Is it topographic issues? What?
Use,
Yeah.
Just a whim.
Right, exactly. I don't want to do it, yeah.
These neighborhoods don't want that.
Right.
Well, sometimes it's not a neighborhood, sometimes it's a farmer. There's a substreet, and the developer has to, you gotta take this, the whole paragraph. This isn't just connected, this is when you build substreets. So what this says, if there's a tract of land that's undeveloped, the developer has to connect the substreet there, even though we don't know what the other use is today, it's just cattle. One issue Henry's brought up is where it's come up in my prior job too, is that other farmer's like, I don't want that substreet connected to me, I'm never selling, I'm never developing. You know, it's a never say never situation. That's what's come up, is why can't I get that?
So instead of running it and putting a hammerhead or something, you can put a cul-de-sac and be finished.
You can be finished, you
Right.
don't have to connect. This policy says thou shalt connect, but you're building those streets.
Yeah.
And then when do we allow that exception? To Henry's point, the problems have always been a farm and a subdivision. Subdivision's being built, developer says, look, I got to build it to your property line, do a temporary hammerhead, and the farmer's like, I don't want you touching my fence.
Yeah.
Don't even come near me.
Or they're saying, the developer doesn't want to spend for the extra pavement, the farmer says, oh, no, you're going to build my road so that I can develop in the
It
future.
works either way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's the exception that's going to end up coming here. It's not going to be about apartments and single family or commercial. It's going to be about farmland and subdivision,
Right.
both ways.
So what's your recommendation?
He's just trying to clarify whose role it is to grant the exception.
Yeah.
That it's not an engineer, it's not mine.
And I think that's clarified enough that exceptions may come from the planning
It'd be
commission.
right here. It'd be right here.
Right. And maybe we don't need to address this today, but I just think standards for compatibility could become an issue down the road. I think my next points are shorter. Next page, 510 on medians, subsection N, medians. Provisions for the maintenance of median areas shall be noted. I didn't know if we wanted to go ahead and assign who is going to be responsible for medians, whether it would be the HOA or local government.
I think it's, it'd be both.
Okay.
It would depend on the controlling jurisdiction.
Okay, so there,
And then that controlling jurisdiction possibly could hand that off to an HOA if the HOA is willing to take it or wants to take it or they want to.
right,
I think that's the whole idea. If you're gonna plant the median, the city may say, look, we're okay with that, but we're not gonna maintain it. You're gonna have to maintain it as HOA.
okay.
I think that's the goal. Somebody's gotta take the maintenance responsibility for the plans and the.
The reason I raised that is just that some jurisdictions want to make it very clear that the city's not going to be responsible for your open space or median maintenance. But if there might be instances when it could be the local government, then we can leave it open-ended as it is now. Let's see, on page 512, subsection S, street improvement requirements. it lists the following requirements shall apply when subdivision abuts an existing roadway, but then I don't think it lists any following requirements. I had a note to strike this previously. It- Just didn't know if we wanted to get rid of that.
Tell me what we're taking out.
The whole paragraph S,
Whole paragraph S.
I believe so.
Who put that in there and what's?
I can't remember. It was in the draft. It might have been in the old regulation. A lot of the stuff is out of the old regulations. I really don't remember.
I think it's just a vestige. I don't think it was serving anything. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. In reading it, I don't think we need it either.
Last matter, going back to Article 3, we give notification letters when we find deficiencies in a plat application, and they'll be sent within 3 days. Is that within 3 days of application? Okay. I might add the words within 3 days of submission. That is impressive turnaround, but just want to clarify.
Okay, do we need to vote on that, or the changes he's made?
I
or-
think however y'all want to word the motion, that we be voting on the amendments to Articles.
Well, it hasn't been passed yet, so why don't we just?
Well, I know, but, so do we vote?
I think you can vote on the documents with the recommendations our
All right, so
council's made.
do we need any discussion on the recommendations he's made thus far? Everybody in agreement? Okay. Well, then we just need a motion on the articles and the standards based on the changes that have been made today.
Mr. Chair, I move that we accept the proposed changes to the amendments 3, 5, and 6.
And appendix A.
And the appendix with the verbiage the council has recommended.
Okay?
Second.
And a second. All in favor? Motion passes. Good job. Thank you. Okay. We're done with all that. We're down to, well, we got new business, we got advisory committee report. We got a personnel committee report. And we do have a budget committee report.
Right. We have both a budget amendment number 1 to talk about and the preliminary budget for next year. You should have gotten in your packet these spreadsheets. And I'm not going to be talking to the spreadsheets. I'm going to be talking to the single page that looks like this that you got that just talks about the major changes. Yeah. We're not going to walk through each line of the spreadsheets. We're just going to talk about major changes over $1,000. So the first one I'm going to be talking to is under paragraph A, which is comparing our original budget this year to the budget amendment that we're proposing. So we're 6 months into this year. We're a little smarter about how money's going to be flowing and expenses for this year. So the budget amendment just kind of reconciles what we know now to the original budget. So if you look at the paragraph A, we're going to talk the revenue column first. And if you can see where it says our fiscal year 2022 budget for revenue was $190,000, $190,300. Everybody see that? Okay. The only,
Pardon me,
here, give him this one. Here's an extra. Here's an extra.
I don't have, thank you, I'm sorry.
So we're starting out with our original budget this year for fiscal year '22 for revenue of $190,300, and then we're going to walk down through the changes that get us to our budget amendment that we're asking you to approve. And so the only changes that exceed $1,000 are our construction review fees are up compared to budget by about $8,000. Zone change and flu maps are up about $3,500. And then if you take all the other changes in the budget amendment, they amount to about $1,500. So the budget amendment that we're proposing is for a revenue of $203,305. So about a $13,000 increase in our budget amendment compared to what our original budget was for revenue. Then if you go to the further right to the expenditure column, Originally, our budget for this year had expenditures of $210,106. Then these list of changes that were occurring, that we've included in the budget amendment number 1. First of all, we had $2,400 in the budget of expenditures for a part-time seasonal intern that we're not going to be hiring. So that would reduce our needs by $2,400. We had to do some COVID sick pay. We had to pay $1,400 in sick pay. So that increased our expenditures by about $1,400. We had an additional land use and recording fees that we transfer to the county. So it turns into an expense to us. We collect the money and then transfer it to the county of $2,500. And then we had an unbudgeted attorney's fee of $3,000 for the lawsuit that we got involved with on the dog kennel on, it was on Maple Avenue, right?
Let me just add, at this point, we're amending the budget for 3,000, but at this point, we've only incurred costs for about 1,200.
Okay.
But we're anticipating
Okay.
a little extra litigation.
Okay. Then if you look at all the other changes, pluses and minuses, less than $1,000, it's about $791. So if you look at our budgeted expenditures in budget amendment number 1 compared to the original budget, it's up about $3,000 to about $213,858. So that's budget amendment number 1 that we're proposing we get adopted today. The next thing we need to talk about is the preliminary budget that we have to turn into the city and county. And so the next column takes the budget amendment that we just talked about, which is our most current thinking for this year, and talk about what changes we would be making to get to next year's preliminary budget. So again, we're taking budget amendment number 1 for this year and then walking through the pluses and minuses that get us to what we're going to turn into for our preliminary budget for next year. So again, we start out with budget amendment number 1 revenue of $203,305. And then the changes that we're proposing to get to our preliminary budget is the first 2 items, construction review fees, we'd be reducing that about $8,000 compared to what's in the preliminary budget for this year. Zone changes by about $2,000, and that's just somewhat conservatism. I mean, we're just putting some conservatism into the revenue side of the house. At the same time, we're expecting that subdivision plats and land use recording fees would both be up about $1,000. And then we've got some miscellaneous income, and that is quite frankly the fact that we're not expecting to have the COVID next year.
Yeah, that was our COVID pay that we amended in.
What?
In fact, that was our COVID money we got from the federal.
Yeah, that's the COVID money we get from reimbursed from the,
That we had last year.
yeah. And then all of the other changes are less than $500. So the preliminary budget that we're proposing to turn into the city and county is $193,300, which is about $3,000 more than this year's budget, about $10,000 less than what our budget amendment for revenue is. And then if you look at the expenditure column for the preliminary budget, again, our budget amendment number 1 that we just talked about a few minutes ago, we had expenditures of $213,858. And then the biggest change is salaries and wages. And there's 2 components of that. About 2 years ago, several of us on, I think it was both the Personnel and Finance Committee, talked about that we should be raising Steve's salary up to the midpoint range of other planning and zoning directors for similar sized counties. We actually hired him in at below that rate, even though he had much more experience. And so we decided that we should raise his salary up to the midpoint range of other planning and zoning directors of similar sized counties. And this is the second part of that raise is in there. We made the first move last year, and this would then bring him up to the midpoint. And then the other point would be an increase of 5% for Lisa. The current COLA is 5.9%, and we're proposing putting in there a 5% increase for, at least at this time, for Lisa next year. And that's a 7493. Retirement is up. The contribution it's a calculated number that we have to pay into the retirement fund is up by $1,800. We won't have the COVID sick pay that we had this year, next year, so that gets subtracted out. Workers' comp insurance is up a little over $1,000. Land use and recording fees, which again, we transfer, it's a pass-through to the county, is down $1,500. We're proposing to buy a new computer, about $1,200. We don't expect to have a lawsuit again next year like we had this year with the dog kennel, so that's $3,000 less of attorney fees. And then we're expecting to spend a little less on our GIS mapping and data services next year compared to this year's budget. So about $1,000 less in keeping our maps current. And all others is a small number. And so the expenditure budget that we're proposing as a preliminary for next year is about $218,000, which is about $18,000 more than this year's budget and about $5,000 more than the preliminary budget that we're proposing. So any questions or comments on those?
How has workers' comp increased double?
I'll explain it, because we got an audit, and our workers'
You got an
comp,
audit from,
KEMI, that we participate in the state workers' comp.
okay,
program.
KEMI, what is that?
KEM, Kentucky Employment, Mutual.
Insurance, yeah.
And we have an agent, Johnson Coleman, and so our workers' comp was budgeted about $1,300 for this year. We
Yeah.
actually had a reduction. So for year-to-date, we've only paid $976. We actually got a refund for this year
Okay.
from our $1,300 bill. But then we got the audit, February 1st of February, and our bill's going up from basically $1,200 to $2,900.
What have they audited?
They do an audit, and the audit has my salary, her salary, our job titles, and the numbers shot up.
Okay.
It wasn't a small increase. You figure $800 on $1,300, it's a fairly major increase.
Yeah.
We've never had a claim.
That's a category change.
And it's just, I don't know if it's a category change or, because it lists our titles under their, I'm a government official, she's a government official assistant, and we're a category this and category that, puts our salaries in and.
So they may have you misclassified before?
That's what I would guess, same thing you're thinking, yeah.
So, and the bill's gonna be $21.42 for next year.
Just curious.
Yeah, I wasn't happy about that either. Maybe that happens with each time you're audited. I don't know the last time.
I don't know what it audit looks like.
I've got the paperwork there. You can see it.
So any other questions on budget amendment number 1 or the preliminary budget?
Is, in the past, have we not budgeted for a lawsuit and just
Right.
absorbed that?
We carry a reserve. We'll talk about that in a second. We carry a legal reserve, a certain dollar amount of legal reserve that if we do get one, we have to draw on.
And let me just add, Henry's contract is a flat retainer per month for all the meetings and correspondence, phone calls, chit chat. But if we have any litigation that's billed at an hourly rate, 2 different hourly rates billed in there for the different, legal, team, and then we incur that as a billable amount that we keep a reserve for. And we spend a little bit of that this year.
Right, just wondering if that was something that we, okay, so that reserve is always there.
Well, we'll talk about that in a second. We're going to talk about the legal reserve in a second. If you go, so now we're going to go to the very bottom of this page, which talks about starting with a beginning balance, then we add revenues, subtract expenditures, and come up with an ending balance. It's kind of our checkbook. It's just an overall look. So for the first column, originally when we budgeted for this year, we thought we were going to start the years with, let's say, $81,000 or almost $82,000 in our checkbook or bank account, okay? Then we budgeted to have revenues of $190,000. We had budgeted to have expenditures of negative $210,000. So we thought we were going to end this year with about $62,000 in the bank account, I guess you would say. And the way that, if you drop down then, the way that ending breakdown is allocated, we are asked to carry about a 10% reserve of our expenditures in case revenue doesn't come in as high as we thought, so we don't have to go back to the city and county and ask for more money. So that would be about $19,000. And the difference then between our entering reserve and our operating reserve is what we call our legal reserve. And that's money that we carry should we happen to get into a lawsuit. So we budgeted to have $43,000 at the end of this year in legal reserve. Now let's go to the budget amendment, the middle column, which is budget amendment number 1 that we just talked about. Actually, we didn't start this year with, when we originally put together the budget, we thought we would start with $81,000. We started with about $77,000 in our checking account. Then we've got the preliminary budget expenditures of about $203,000, which is more revenue than we thought we would have in the budget. Then we have expenditures of about $213,000. So we're expecting now that we're going to end our ending reserve this year is actually going to be up about $4,000 compared to what our original budget was. So we think we're going to end this year with about $66,000 in the bank account. And so the reserve, again, is 10% of our revenue. So the reserve for the operating reserve is like $20,000, and that leaves the leftover $46,000 for what we call our legal reserve. Now let's go to next year. The fiscal year 2023 preliminary budget. Right now, we would start the year with a beginning balance of about $66,000. We have revenue, again, in our proposed fiscal year preliminary budget of $193,000. We've got expenditures of $218,000. And so the ending reserve would be about $41,000, or down about $20-some thousand from this year, if everything happens as we've got proposed. And again, about $19,000 of that would be set for our 10% operating reserve, and the $22,000 would be left over for our legal reserve. Now, we did have a discussion at our last budget meeting in terms of how low can we let that legal reserve projected fall before we have to go back to the city and county and say, you know, we've been giving $75,000 a year from you guys for 10 or 15 years. We're now concerned that we need to ask for more, okay? Reason being, if you look at back in 2020, we had an ending reserve of $102,000. 2021, that dropped to $76,000. 2022, we're expecting it to drop to $66,000. Next year, we're expecting to drop to $41,000, because every year we spend more than we take in revenue. So at some point, we have to talk to the city and county about increasing what they've been giving us. We haven't done that as long as I've been here. So.
That went back and looked, the city allocation's been the same since 2014.
Yeah. At any rate, the discussion that we had in terms of how much legal reserve should we carry. And we basically said that we would, if you look at roughly doubling our operating reserve, that's the type of ending breakdown we would like to have. So we would like to have a legal reserve at least as big as our operating reserve. So roughly a $20,000 operating reserve, roughly a $20,000 legal reserve. We're not there yet, so we're not proposing to go back and talk to the city and county about more money. But I think when we do our budget review this year, we want to give them a heads up that, you know, we've been allowing this to walk down now for quite some time. But it's now getting to the point that we may be well coming forward in the fiscal year 2024 budget, and asking for an additional contribution from the city and county.
It's an interesting dynamic we have, because we talked also about our fees. You know, one option is to raise our fees, but I think leveled off our fees a few years back. We think they're consumer friendly and makes sense. The fact that our budget is what it is, to adjust the fees on developers and homeowners, and really doesn't feel like the right way. But what's interesting about our budget is that construction review fee, for example. We budgeted $1,000, but we don't know how many streets we're going to get, and we're already at 8,000 this year, or 9,000. That's why we amended to 8,000. But if this community started to grow quickly, and we saw more subdivisions and more streets and more commercial development, that's kind of our bread and butter. So it wouldn't be surprising if we got on a little bit of a growth spurt here, that we may not need to go back to the city and county. Our zoning permits could easily, back in the day, they were almost six-figure numbers before the 07 recession. Our construction fees are growing as we build new streets. So all these projects in the pipeline we just talked about for streets, that equals new dollars for us in our revenue stream. So we really don't know what we've got till the year progresses and we see how many zoning permits we're going to get. We just don't budget a lot, we just don't know. But you know, just a small amount of growth, we could easily be seeing $10 or $20 or $30,000 more revenue. But to Terry's point, if everything stays about the same, at some point, we're drawing down on that reserve.
the budget committee was in agreement that we've been very good stewards of the money we've been given. And it's, I think, in that we feel that we can go another year without asking for any money, but that we thought it would be prudent to let the government agencies know that in the next year, we may be coming for, we very possibly could be coming for some money. And I think that's just a good heads up for them, and that's being judicious on our behalf, is that looking forward, so we can live with what we have, but we're getting to the breaking point where we may need to. And that way, it's not gonna be a shock when we come back next year and potentially have to request money for the first time in 8 years, or 10 years.
So unless there are other questions, we need a motion to accept the preliminary budget amendment number 1 for fiscal year 2022 and the preliminary budget for fiscal year 2023. So Steve can turn the preliminary budget into the city and county.
We have a motion. We have a second. All in favor? Motion passes. Thank you very much, Commissioner Manning, for that great report.
Great report. Thank you.
Okay, other new business.
We typically elect officers in the month of February, because March 1 is what says in the bylaws that the new officers take effect. And so that's on the table for you all to consider and discuss. I've got the list here of the officers. Obviously, we have a chairman and vice chairman. And we don't, the secretary duties are actually performed by Lisa, so we don't actually fill that position. And then we have all those committee assignments, as you all know, that we talk about a couple times a year.
So we got advisory committee,
Advisory committee is,
budget,
we got tech review, personnel, budget, advisory committee, beautification, and the Bluegrass Ag Regional Planning Council designee, which I usually serve that. So the tech review is Jim, Terry, Tom, and Sam. Personnel is Jeff and Jim, and by default, the chair and vice chair serve on personnel.
I'm on
And
personnel.
Steve Griffin. Budget committee is Terry, Rita, and Jeff. Advisory committee is Jeff and Sally. And Vince is our designation to beautification. I think you'd start with your 2 officers, chair and vice chair, and then a couple of those defer.
To make a motion, we retain our chair and vice chair
For a full term.
for full term.
thank you. Okay, so do we just do all this together or one at a
You
time?
don't need to do the chair and vice chair, elect your officers one at a time or together, and then we just, the committee designations, the chair actually is the
Okay.
one that sets the committees.
So we,
Anybody opposed?
Make the vote first.
all right, so we got a motion. Do we need to have a vote? You're putting them both together, right? So we just need to have a vote. We had a motion, got a vote. Okay, so that passes. Thank you all very much. Your committees, you just want to leave the people who are on the committees, if they want to change committee or stay on the committee, you want to just,
Work pretty good. If you guys want to swap around, so.
does anybody have a preference to be on another committee that they're not on, or be on, not, or be off a committee they're currently on, or everybody happy?
What does Vince do?
Beautification meets once a month, and,
You can do that, Rick.
and he's their designate, and that's a city of Danville committee. And they plant flowers downtown and talk about planting contracts and mowing contracts.
Great committee, great committee.
Jeff served on it for about 60 days. I'll back up when, the planning commission representative can't be there. And Vince has been on it.
I was on it for,
But it's up to you all, if you guys want to assign someone else. It's up to you all, if y'all want to serve on the beautification committee.
I'm good. I enjoy listening to Terry.
Your own budget.
I'm happy to serve on the.
What committee are you currently on?
She is on the advisory, which interesting enough, besides big documents, they don't meet that often. So advisory kind of can go in big gaps. The other committees, tech review meets every month. Budget kind of meets 3 months a year. And the personnel committee tends to meet in June for employee evaluations or if any other big issues pop up.
I'd say if everybody's happy where they are, and don't want,
She's on the advisory, Sally. But that committee doesn't meet very often. You all did a little bit of heavy lifting this year because we had the subregs. And if the comp plan that gets revised in future is on North, that advisory committee will play a key role in those documents.
so do we want to make a motion that if no one has a preference to change or move, that keep committees as are?
Let me throw this out there, if Sally's interested, would you be willing to kind of be Vince's backup? Because he's been, obviously, he's going through a medical issue, and he's had to miss. Beautification is there if anyone wants to serve.
I'm happy to serve in any way you need.
Would you want to serve? They meet the first Monday of every month at 4 o'clock.
So if he's unable.
If he's unable, I would contact you and ask if you're willing to sit in on beautification. Would you be okay with that? Because I go when he's not there, and it's a little painful sometimes.
Mrs. Nash would call me.
It's tough because it's a lot of discussion about flowers and plants.
My world would be upside down. Never.
We talk about hanging baskets and things of that nature, so.
I mean, it's an important committee.
It is an important committee. And let me just real quick tell you an interesting part. We got this streetscape, I'm on streetscape committee too, which isn't shown on here. And as you all know, the city's getting ready to do a major project from 4th to 2nd. Everything from building to building's coming out, and everything's going back brand new. So the beautification committee's been looking at the landscape plans of that streetscape committee and talking about how they're gonna have to handle plannings. The project is supposed to be bid and started literally the day after Brass Band Festival. And then the whole downtown is gonna be a construction zone, so probably next year. Because they're taking the sidewalks out, the trees out, they're putting up a paver median in. Sidewalks are being widened, but parklets are coming back, all new trees, benches, lights, everything, from 2nd to 4th, and we're burying all utilities on 4th Street, all the way down, and 4th Street's alignment's gonna change a little bit too, to possibly a one-way street configuration. I mean, one lane, it's already one lane. It's two lanes as you go by US Bank, it becomes one dedicated lane to allow those areas along Harvey's and that to build that sidewalks out and make more pedestrian outdoor space. There's a whole construction progress, detours, phasing of half block to half block. Again, starts in June and will go all the way to spring of next year.
It's gonna take a while, but it's gonna look great.
And all new trees, everything. All trees are coming out, it's downtown, everything's brand new. So Sally, funny enough, beautifications played a role in that because they've been looking at all their plannings for this next year, how they have to change it, and then what will happen in the future, new street lights, hanging baskets, all that kind of stuff.
Happy to serve in any way.
All right, so we may, do we have a motion and a vote on the committees?
Do we need to vote on staying on
Committee's just,
Okay. All right, so committees have been assigned. All right. So any other new business? Any announcements? We have a motion to adjourn. I got 14 motions to adjourn. I'll take one of those as a second. Meeting adjourned. Thank you all very much. That was